The silence in the desert was a lie. Lyra Morgan had learned this truth during her 3 years at the remote research station. What others mistook for emptiness was actually a symphony of subtle sounds. The whisper of wind over sand dunes, the skittering of desert creatures, the ancient grinding of the earth itself. These sounds had become her companions, her strange comfort in exile. Tonight, that symphony played with unusual intensity. The wind carried a warning as it moaned around the corners of her small metal and glass outpost. Lyra stood at the window, watching darkness swallow the last blush of sunset. Her reflection stared back, hair pulled into a severe knot, eyes hollow with memories she couldn't outrun. The storm was coming, not the cleansing rain the land so desperately needed, but a violent tantrum of wind and dust that would scour everything in its path. Lyra welcomed it. Sometimes she needed the external world to match the chaos she carried inside. She moved through her quarters with practiced efficiency, securing equipment and checking the seals on the windows. The outpost was a testament to order and control, everything labeled, categorized, and contained. Books on desert vegetation lined shelves in perfect alphabetical order. Geological samples sat in rows, each tagged with precise coordinates and dates. Her workspace was immaculate, surgical in its cleanliness. Order was her religion now. Control was all she had left. The memory arrived as it always did, uninvited and sharp enough to steal her breath. The antiseptic smell of the military hospital, the doctor's carefully composed face, the words that had shattered her future. The trauma to your reproductive system was extensive, Captain Morgan. I'm afraid having children will be impossible. Then Harrison's face when she told him. Her fiancé of 5 years hadn't shouted or stormed out. That would have been easier to bear. Instead, he had looked at her with something worse than anger, disappointment, as if she were a broken appliance he'd invested too much in. I want a family, Lyra. A real family. Sons who'll carry on the Pierce name. He had made it sound so reasonable, so logical, as if their years together, their plans, their love, could be dismissed with a cost-benefit analysis that found her wanting. She had joined the Army as a combat medic to save lives, to make a difference. The irony wasn't lost on her that in her final mission, the one that earned her a Purple Heart and medical discharge, she had lost the ability to create life. Her body had survived the explosion, but parts of her future had died in that remote Afghan mountain pass. Harrison hadn't waited long to find someone whole, someone who could give him what she couldn't, someone who hadn't traded her fertility for service to country. Lyra shook the memories away and moved to her research table. The specimens laid out before her represented 3 months of work. Desert plants with remarkable survival properties. One in particular had captured her attention. A small, unremarkable-looking succulent with extraordinary cellular regeneration capabilities. The locals called it Ghost Heart for its pale center and the legends surrounding it. Her grandfather's journals had first mentioned it. Theodore Morgan had been an anthropologist who spent decades documenting the indigenous stories of the Mojave. His meticulous notes described the plant as sacred to the native tribes, believed to be a gift from spirit wolves who protected the land. Lyra had smiled at the folklore when she first read it. Now, after finding and studying the plant, she wasn't smiling anymore. Its properties defied conventional science. Tissue samples mixed with the plant's extract showed regeneration rates that should have been impossible. If she could isolate the compound responsible, a flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, followed by a crack of thunder that shook dust from the ceiling. Lyra glanced at her watch. The storm had arrived earlier than predicted. She secured her samples and moved to check the generator. The outpost could withstand just about anything the desert threw at it, but she wasn't taking chances. Outside, the wind screamed like a wounded animal, hurling sand against the reinforced windows. The power flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Lyra made a cup of tea and settled into her chair by the window, watching nature's fury unfold. These moments of wild chaos made her feel less alone somehow, less singular in her brokenness. Another flash of lightning, closer this time, painting the landscape in stark relief. Something caught her eye at the edge of her property line, a dark shape near the low stone marker that separated her small patch of claimed territory from the vast wilderness beyond. Probably a boulder dislodged by the wind, or a mirage created by the storm's electrical charge. She squinted, trying to make sense of it. Another lightning strike revealed the truth. Not a boulder. Something alive. Something moving. Despite herself, Lyra felt a flutter of concern. Desert wildlife usually sought shelter long before a storm hit. Whatever was out there was either desperate or injured. Professional curiosity warred with self-preservation. She was a botanist now, not a wildlife rescuer. Certainly not a combat medic anymore. She had no business going out in a sandstorm to investigate. The rational choice was clear. Stay inside, stay safe, stay separate. But the shape moved again, and this time, Lyra could swear it looked like it was struggling toward her outpost, toward her light, the only light for miles in any direction. She thought of herself 3 years ago, bleeding in the mountains, desperate for help. Would she be alive if someone had chosen safety over compassion? "Damn it," she whispered, already knowing she would hate herself for this decision. She pulled on her heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around her lower face, and grabbed a powerful flashlight. The medical kit was still where it had always been, fully stocked and ready. Some habits died hard. The moment she opened the door, the storm tried to rip it from her grasp. Sand and wind assaulted her, stinging any exposed skin. Leaning into the gale, she fought her way onto the small porch, one hand shielding the flashlight beam. The shape was closer now. In the erratic dance of light and shadow, Lyra could make out what appeared to be a massive wolf. The size alone was startling, far larger than the coyotes or even the rare gray wolves that occasionally passed through the territory. Its coat was the color of desert twilight, a mixture of sand and shadow. But what stopped Lyra cold was the realization that the wolf wasn't alone. It was protecting something, a bundle tucked close to its body that it seemed to be shielding from the storm. Impossible thoughts raced through her mind. Was it prey? Some kill the animal was defending? But the careful way the wolf moved, the deliberate positioning of its body as a shield against the wind. The wolf lifted its head, somehow sensing her presence despite the howling storm. Lyra's flashlight beam caught its eyes. Not the flat, feral gaze of a wild animal, but something disturbingly aware. Pain and desperation radiated from those eyes, a silent plea that transcended species. Every scientific instinct told Lyra to retreat. This was a wild predator, potentially dangerous even if injured. But the medic in her, the part she thought she'd buried under years of solitude and research, recognized suffering when she saw it. She took a step down from the porch, then another. The ground beneath her boots shifted treacherously. 20 feet from the wolf, she stopped, not wanting to appear threatening. The wolf watched her, its body language changing from defensive to something Lyra couldn't quite interpret. It was protecting its cargo, but it seemed to want her to approach. As another lightning flash illuminated the scene, Lyra saw what had been hidden before, a dark stain spreading across the wolf's flank. Blood, a lot of it. The animal was severely injured, a deep gash running along its side. Even as she processed this, the wolf did something that defied all natural behavior. With painful, deliberate movements, it nudged the bundle it had been protecting, pushing it slightly toward Lyra with its nose. An offering, a desperate bargain. Her heart hammering, Lyra closed the distance. The wolf didn't growl or bare its teeth as she approached. It simply watched her with those impossible eyes, amber, she realized, like ancient sap frozen in time. Kneeling in the cold sand, she reached for the bundle. It was wrapped in what appeared to be rough-spun cloth, surprisingly clean given the circumstances. With trembling fingers, she pulled back a corner of the fabric. The wind chose that moment to die down, creating an eerie pocket of stillness. And in that stillness, Lyra heard a soft, snuffling sound. A tiny face stared up at her from within the blankets. A perfect human face. A baby. Reality seemed to warp around her. A baby, in the middle of nowhere, during a killer storm, with a dying wolf as its guardian. It was madness, a hallucination brought on by loneliness and grief. But the infant stirred, its little mouth working soundlessly, eyelids fluttering in sleep. Very real, very alive. Lyra looked from the child to the wolf. The animal's massive head was sinking to the sand, its strength clearly failing. A rattling breath escaped its throat, and Lyra recognized the sound from her battlefield days. The wolf was dying. The unspoken exchange was clear. Save the child, Tita. But something in Lyra rebelled at the cruel calculation. The same cold math that had determined her own worth, her own value, based on what she could or couldn't provide. "No," she whispered, the word lost to the returning wind. "Not just one. Both of you." Decision made, she gathered the bundled infant against her chest, shielding its tiny face from the stinging sand. The baby weighed almost nothing, a warm bundle of fragile life that stirred something deep and aching inside her. The wolf was another matter. It had to weigh well over 150 pounds, far too heavy for her to carry. But she had dragged wounded soldiers larger than this. "I'll be back," she told the wolf, not caring how crazy it seemed to speak to a wild animal. "Hold on." She fought her way back to the outpost, the precious bundle clutched tight. Inside, she quickly assessed the infant. A boy, apparently healthy, just a few weeks old. No obvious injuries or signs of exposure. Miraculously, he remained asleep through the entire ordeal. After placing him securely on her bed, surrounded by pillows, Lyra grabbed what she needed: the heavy-duty plastic sled she used for hauling soil samples, more blankets, the comprehensive medical kit. Returning to the wolf was even harder than leaving it. The storm had intensified, the wind now carrying projectiles of sand and small debris that stung like insect bites where they struck exposed skin. The wolf hadn't moved. For a terrible moment, Lyra thought she was too late. Then she saw the shallow rise and fall of its massive rib cage. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside its head. "I'm back. I'm going to help you." She placed a hesitant hand behind its ear. The fur was coarse, thick with sand, but the skin beneath burned with fever. A faint pulse beat against her fingertips. Getting the wolf onto the sled was a brutal ordeal. Despite its weakened state, it was a massive, dense weight of muscle and bone. Lyra strained and pushed, using leverage techniques she'd learned for moving the wounded. Finally, with one last desperate heave, she managed to roll the bulk of its body onto the plastic. Dragging the sled across the shifting sand took everything she had. Each step was a battle against both the weight and the wind that seemed determined to push her back. By the time she reached the outpost, her lungs burned and her muscles screamed in protest. But they had made it. All three of them were inside, safe from the storm's wrath. The wolf lay on the sled in the middle of her living room, bleeding onto the pale tiles. A wild, dangerous predator in her sterile sanctuary. In her bedroom, a child she didn't know slept in her bed. Her quiet, empty, ordered life had been invaded by chaos in its purest form. And as she looked at the two souls she had dragged in from the night, a strange, terrifying thought bloomed in her chest. Thank God. The next hours passed in a blur of focused activity. Lyra attended to the infant first, practical considerations overriding her emotional turmoil. The baby boy appeared healthy but needed nourishment. With no formula available, she prepared a diluted solution of electrolytes and sugars from her medical supplies. Not ideal, but sufficient for short-term needs. When the baby awoke during her examination, Lyra found herself transfixed by his eyes. A startlingly deep blue that seemed too aware, too intelligent for a newborn. A small birthmark on his wrist caught her attention, a perfect crescent moon shape, unusual in its clarity. He accepted the improvised formula without complaint, his gaze never leaving her face. No crying, no fussing, just that unnervingly steady observation that made her wonder if he somehow understood the strangeness of their situation. Once the child was fed and settled, Lyra turned her attention to the wolf. She approached with caution, medical kit in hand, uncertain how the injured animal would react to treatment. The wound was far worse than she'd initially assessed, not a simple gash but a deep, ragged tear that exposed muscle tissue. Yet something about it seemed strange. The edges were unnaturally clean, and despite the severity, the bleeding had somehow been partially staunched. "This is going to hurt," she warned, though she felt foolish speaking to a wild animal as if it could understand. As she began cleaning the wound, the wolf flinched violently. A low growl rumbled from its chest, instinctive and warning. Lyra froze, suddenly remembering exactly what she was dealing with. A wild apex predator, with jaws strong enough to crush bone. But then something extraordinary happened. The growl subsided into a pained whine, and the wolf's eyes found hers. In that amber gaze, Lyra saw something impossible. An apology. Understanding. The animal was fighting its own instincts, allowing her to continue. "Okay, brave one," she murmured, her fear receding. "We can do this." She worked methodically, cleaning away sand and debris, disinfecting the wound. The wolf trembled beneath her hands, but remained still, enduring the treatment with a stoicism that defied natural behavior. The injury required sutures, deep, careful stitches to close the worst of the damage. Lyra hadn't performed field surgery since Afghanistan, but her hands remembered the rhythms. Pierce, pull, knot. Pierce, pull, knot. A silent prayer with each stitch. Throughout the procedure, the wolf's eyes never left her face. There was intelligence in that gaze, a presence that went beyond animal awareness. Several times, Lyra had to stop and remind herself that this was a wild creature, not a patient capable of understanding her reassurances. When she finished, her back ached and her hands were slick with sweat and antiseptic. The stitched wound was far from perfect, but it was closed. She covered it with sterile dressing, securing it as best she could to the animal's fur. Exhaustion hit her like a physical force. She slumped back against the nearest wall, adrenaline fading to leave bone-deep fatigue in its wake. She had done all she could. The rest was up to biology and whatever strange fate had brought these two visitors to her door. The wolf released a long, slow sigh. Its massive head finally rested on the floor, eyes closing in apparent relief or surrender. Not unconscious, Lyra sensed, but conserving energy for the battle ahead. She cleaned up mechanically, disposing of bloody materials and sterilizing her tools. The familiar routines of post-treatment care grounded her, provided a framework for the insanity of the situation. But the room was forever changed. The scent of wolf, wild, musky, alive, permeated her sterile environment. The presence of two heartbeats not her own altered the very air. Her carefully constructed isolation had been breached, and Lyra wasn't sure if she should feel terrified or grateful. She checked on the baby once more, still sleeping peacefully, before pulling a chair close to where the wolf lay. She couldn't bring herself to leave either of them alone, not tonight, so she would watch over them both, this strange pack that fate had thrust upon her. In the deep, quiet hours, as the storm finally spent itself and silence reclaimed the desert, Lyra sat vigil. She watched the slow rise and fall of the wolf's bandaged flank. She listened for the soft breathing from her bedroom. Her thoughts were a tangled mess of questions without answers. Who had left an infant in the care of a wolf? Where had they come from? The nearest town was over 60 miles away. The military testing grounds were the only other facility within a 100-mile radius, and they certainly weren't in the business of babies and wolves. Perhaps she had finally lost her mind. Perhaps grief and isolation had fractured her reality, and she was hallucinating this entire scenario. The thought should have frightened her, but instead, it almost made her smile. If this was madness, it was far more interesting than her previous sanity. She must have dozed off at some point, because she startled awake to find pale dawn light filtering through the windows. For a disoriented moment, she thought the previous night had been a dream. Then she registered the weight against her legs. The wolf had moved during the night. Somehow, despite its injuries, it had dragged itself across the floor to lie beside her chair. Its massive body was curled around the base, one heavy paw resting against her foot, a protective position. A pack position. Stranger still, a corner of the thermal blanket she had laid over the animal was now draped across her knees. It could have been an accident, a result of the wolf's movement, but the careful placement suggested otherwise. Lyra stared down at the sleeping predator, her scientific mind struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with what she knew about animal behavior. Nothing about this wolf fit any natural pattern. From the bedroom came a soft cooing sound. The baby was awake. As Lyra moved to stand, the wolf's eyes opened immediately, alert, aware, tracking her movement with that unsettling intelligence. It made no attempt to rise, but watched as she crossed to the bedroom. The infant looked up at her with those two knowing eyes, tiny fists waving in the air. No crying, just that same intense focus she had noticed before. "Good morning to you too," Lyra said softly, lifting him from his pillow nest. "You're quite the mysterious visitor." As she changed and fed him, her mind worked furiously. She needed to contact authorities. A missing infant would surely be the subject of a search. There would be panicked parents, police bulletins, yet something held her back. The memory of the wolf's deliberate actions, the way it had brought the child to her specifically, protected it through the storm, offered it to her with clear intent. This was no random occurrence, no simple case of a lost child. And then there was the wolf itself. Its size alone marked it as unusual, not to mention its behavior. No wild animal should be able to understand human intent the way this one seemed to. No wolf should be able to form a protective bond with a human infant. Lyra carried the baby back to the main room. The wolf's head lifted immediately, eyes fixing on the child with what could only be described as concern. "He's fine," Lyra found herself saying. "Healthy and strong." The wolf's tension visibly eased, its massive head lowering back to the floor. She placed the baby on a blanket on the floor, close enough for the wolf to see, but not within reach. Trust only extended so far, after all. Moving to her communication station, Lyra powered up the satellite link. If she was going to report this situation, now was the time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What exactly would she report? That a giant wolf had delivered a baby to her door during a sandstorm? That the wolf seemed sentient and protective? That she had performed emergency surgery on a wild predator, which now lay domesticated on her living room floor? They would think she had lost her mind. They would send people, rangers, police, perhaps even psychiatric personnel. They would take the baby, destroy the wolf, and likely end her research grant when they determined she was suffering from isolation-induced psychosis. And something deep inside her rebelled at the thought. These two beings had come to her, had sought her out specifically, had trusted her. Her hand fell away from the keyboard. She would wait, just for a day or two. Observe, document, try to make sense of the situation before involving authorities. Her scientific mind justified this as gathering necessary data. The truth was both simpler and more complex. She didn't want to lose them. She returned to sit near the wolf and the baby, forming a triangle of improbable companionship. The wolf's eyes followed her, intelligent and approving, as if it understood her decision. "You're not what you seem, are you?" she asked quietly. The wolf blinked slowly, deliberately, its gaze never wavering. In the quiet morning light, with the remnants of the storm swept away by the clean desert air, Lyra Morgan sat with her impossible guests and felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 long years: purpose. The days that followed established a strange new rhythm to Lyra's life. The wolf's recovery defied medical science. By the 3rd day, the wound that should have taken weeks to heal showed signs of advanced regeneration. The edges had knitted together cleanly, inflammation had disappeared, and the animal moved with increasing strength. The baby, whom Lyra had begun calling Elian in her notes, after a character from her grandfather's stories about desert guardians, continued to display unusual awareness. He rarely cried, his deep blue eyes tracking movements with uncanny focus. The crescent birthmark on his wrist sometimes seemed to shimmer in certain light, though Lyra told herself this was merely an optical illusion. A peculiar domesticity settled over the outpost. The wolf remained inside, seemingly content to stay within the confines of the small station rather than return to the wild. It spent hours watching over Elian while Lyra worked, positioning itself as a furry barricade between the baby and the door. In the quiet afternoons, Lyra found herself talking to the wolf. At first, it was just practical information about her research or observations about Elian. But as days passed, the silence and the wolf's attentive gaze invited deeper confidences. "His name was Harrison," she said one evening, sitting on the floor beside the massive animal. "We met during my second tour. He was intelligence, I was medical. We had plans." The wolf's ears pricked forward, head tilted slightly, as if genuinely interested in her story. "After the explosion, when they told me I couldn't have children," she traced the rim of her teacup, the memory still sharp enough to cut. "He said he needed sons to carry on his legacy, said it wasn't personal." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. 7 years together, and he could just erase it all, make it about biology, about function. I was broken equipment to be replaced. The wolf made a low sound in its throat, almost a growl, but softer. It shifted, moving closer until its massive head rested near her knee. The gesture was so deliberately comforting that Lyra's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "I came out here to match my insides," she whispered, one hand tentatively settling on the wolf's head. "Empty, barren. But you and Elian, you needed me. You didn't care if I was broken." The wolf leaned into her touch, amber eyes holding hers with an intensity that transcended species. In that moment, something shifted in Lyra's perception. The fear she had carried for so long, of inadequacy, of worthlessness, began to loosen its grip. Here, in this impossible situation, she was not defined by what she couldn't do. She was a caregiver, a protector, a necessity. On the 7th day, everything changed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the desert when Lyra spotted a dust plume on the horizon. A vehicle approaching, the first visitor in over 3 months. Ice flooded her veins. No one came here. Her supply drops were scheduled and left at a designated point miles away. This was deliberate. Someone was coming directly to her. The wolf was at her side instantly, a low growl vibrating through its powerful frame. It had seen the approaching threat too, body language shifting from domestic calm to dangerous alertness. "Stay inside," Lyra told it, though part of her recognized the absurdity of giving commands to a wild predator. To her surprise, the wolf retreated deeper into the outpost, positioning itself in the bedroom doorway near Elian. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the setting sun as the vehicle drew closer. A sleek, silver SUV, ridiculously clean against the rugged landscape. Her stomach dropped as recognition hit. The SUV pulled to a stop, dust settling around its pristine exterior. The driver's side door opened, and Harrison Pierce stepped out, looking as out of place in the desert as his vehicle. His tailored clothes and carefully styled hair spoke of climate-controlled offices and expense account lunches. "Lyra," he called, his voice carrying that familiar note of strained patience she had once mistaken for affection. "I have to say, you really committed to the whole hermit thing." Her mind raced. How had he found her? Why was he here after all this time? "What are you doing here, Harrison?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. A predator's smile, calculating and cold. "I was worried about you out here all alone. It's not healthy." He gestured vaguely at the barren landscape. "I found your research grant proposal. It wasn't hard." Of course. Harrison had connections in military research. He would have been able to track her work, find the location of her outpost. "I'm not alone," she said, the words feeling unexpectedly true. He laughed, a condescending sound. "Right. You and your cacti." He stepped closer. "Listen, Lyra, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too hasty. We had a good thing. We can work on the issue. There are options, surrogates, adoption." The realization hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't here to apologize or make amends. He was here to reacquire a possession, something he had discarded, but now decided might be useful after all. "No," she said, the word falling between them like a stone. Harrison's smile faltered. "Lyra, be reasonable. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment. This place is a wasteland. You're wasting your life out here." "I'm not wasting anything," she replied, a new strength flowing into her voice. "My life is no longer any of your business. You need to leave." His expression shifted from condescension to irritation. "Don't be childish. I drove 6 hours to come get you." "I didn't ask you to." He moved then, faster than she expected, closing the distance between them in 2 quick strides. His hand clamped around her wrist, fingers digging in with painful familiarity, the grip of ownership, of control. "We're done discussing this," he hissed, his face close to hers. "You're coming with me." Pain shot up her arm. Fear, cold and familiar, clawed at her throat. In that moment, she was back in his elegant apartment, listening to him explain why she was no longer worthy of his future. But before she could react, a sound split the air. Not quite a bark, not quite a roar, but a primal declaration of rage. The door to the outpost exploded outward, and the wolf erupted into the fading daylight. It was no longer the patient invalid or quiet companion. It was nature's perfect predator, a blur of sand-colored fur and righteous fury. The sound it made raised every hair on Lyra's body, a sound that came from the throat of the wilderness itself. Harrison froze, his eyes widening with disbelief and terror. He released Lyra's wrist reflexively, stumbling backward. The wolf didn't hesitate. It launched itself forward, not in an attack to kill, but a calculated display of overwhelming force. It struck Harrison's chest with its massive shoulder, sending him flying backward as if he'd been hit by a car. Harrison landed in a graceless heap, the air knocked from his lungs in an audible whoosh. He scrambled backward through the dirt, face contorted in naked fear. The wolf positioned itself between Lyra and Harrison, a living shield, its entire focus on the man sprawled on the ground. A continuous rumbling growl vibrated through its powerful frame. But something was wrong. The wolf stumbled suddenly, letting out a sharp cry of pain. Lyra looked down in horror to see fresh blood staining its side. The impact, the violent exertion, the healing wound had torn open again. The wolf wavered, strong legs trembling visibly. It turned its head to look at her, amber eyes filled with a devastating vulnerability, an apology. Then it collapsed, falling heavily to the sand. "No!" Lyra gasped, dropping to her knees beside the wolf's massive form. "No, no, no." Time seemed to stop as she pressed her hands to the reopened wound, feeling warm blood pulse between her fingers. The world narrowed to this single point of crisis, the wolf's labored breathing, the spreading stain of red on sand. She was vaguely aware of Harrison scrambling to his feet, his face ashen. "What the hell is that thing?" he demanded, voice high with terror. "It's a monster!" The word ignited something in Lyra, a white-hot rage that burned through fear and uncertainty. This being who had protected her, who had brought Elian to safety, who had shown more humanity than the actual human standing before her. A monster? "Get away from here," she snarled, not looking up from the wolf. "Don't you touch him!" Harrison stared at the scene before him, his ex-fiancée kneeling in the dirt, cradling the head of a massive, bleeding wolf, glaring at him with an intensity that made him step back. "You're insane," he spat, disgust replacing fear. "You've lost your mind." He retreated to his vehicle, movements jerky with residual fear. "Fine, stay here, rot in this hellhole with your pet." The SUV's engine roared to life, and Harrison sped away in a cloud of dust, the gleam of silver swallowed by the gathering dusk. Lyra barely registered his departure. All that mattered was the life fading beneath her hands. "Please," she whispered, tears falling unchecked. "Please don't leave me. You can't leave." She was shielding the wolf now, her body curved protectively over its massive form. She who had always been the one in need of protection had become the protector. The realization shifted something fundamental within her soul, and as she held the wolf, cradling its head and whispering desperate pleas, something extraordinary began to happen. A light, faint at first, then intensifying, emanated from beneath her hands. A warm golden glow pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Lyra pulled back slightly, confusion momentarily overriding grief. The light was coming from the wolf's wound, but it wasn't a light of injury. It was a light of healing, of transformation. It spread, engulfing the wolf's entire body in a cocoon of radiance. The air around them charged with energy, the scent of ozone and sage and something ancient filling Lyra's lungs. She could feel the change happening within the light, a shifting of bone, a realignment of form. The coarse fur beneath her hands softened, became something else entirely. The powerful muzzle elongated and flattened. The entire structure of the being she held was rearranging itself. The light pulsed one final time, a silent explosion of brilliance that left after-images dancing in Lyra's vision. And when it faded, the wolf was gone. In its place, lying on the sand, was a man. He was tall and powerfully built, his body muscled with the same lean strength as the wolf. His skin was deeply tanned by sun and weather, marked with old scars that spoke of battles survived. His hair was the dark color of the desert at midnight, wild and untamed. Most shocking of all were his eyes, now opening slowly as he regained consciousness. The same amber eyes that had watched her, comforted her, protected her, now set in a human face of striking intensity. He stirred, groaning, one hand moving to his side where the wound had been, but the injury was gone, leaving only smooth, unbroken skin behind. Lyra couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her mind was a white void of pure, undiluted shock. She was kneeling beside a man who moments before had been a wolf, the wolf she had saved, the wolf who had saved her. He looked at her, his expression one of profound pain, not physical, but emotional. The same depth of feeling she had recognized in the wolf's gaze from their first encounter. His lips parted, and when he spoke, his voice was a raw, hoarse whisper, deep and resonant with disuse, a voice that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. Lyra. He said her name like a prayer, like a revelation, like the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. "My name is Dominic," he said, his amber eyes never leaving hers, "and I've been looking for you for a very long time." The desert night closed around Lyra and Dominic like a velvet shroud. She knelt in the sand, staring at the man who moments before had been a wolf. Her scientific mind struggled to process the transformation she had witnessed. Impossible seemed such an inadequate word. "Dominic," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strangely familiar, as if she had known it all along. "How do you know my name?" He attempted to rise but faltered, his newly transformed body still weak from the ordeal. Lyra's medical instincts overrode her shock. She helped him to his feet, draping his arm across her shoulders. His skin burned with unnatural heat against hers. "We need to get you inside," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Together they stumbled toward the outpost, the thermal blanket wrapped around his waist, the only concession to modesty. Inside, Elian still slept peacefully, oblivious to the miraculous transformation that had occurred. Lyra guided Dominic to the small couch, easing him down before retrieving clothes from her emergency supplies. They would be too small, but better than nothing. "Here," she said, handing him the sweatpants and t-shirt. "I'll give you privacy." She moved to check on Elian, grateful for the moment to collect her thoughts. When she returned, Dominic sat dressed in the borrowed clothes that strained against his frame. He looked less otherworldly now, though no less dangerous. His amber eyes tracked her movement, alert despite his evident exhaustion. "You need to drink something," Lyra said, falling back on practical matters to avoid the looming questions. She filled a glass with water and offered it to him. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, draining it in several long swallows. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, the raw hoarseness fading. "I owe you an explanation," he said, "though I'm not sure where to begin." "The beginning would be good," Lyra replied, settling into a chair across from him. "Who are you? What are you? And why did you bring a baby to my doorstep in the middle of a sandstorm?" Dominic's expression darkened. He looked toward the bedroom where Elian slept. "Elian is my nephew," he said. "My sister's son. She died protecting him 3 days ago." The simple statement carried the weight of immeasurable grief. Lyra's throat tightened in response. "I'm sorry," she offered, knowing how inadequate the words were. "We were ambushed," Dominic continued, his gaze turning inward as if seeing the attack unfold again. Xavier Blackwood and his followers. They've been hunting us for generations, but this time they had help. Human help. Humans who know about, whatever you are? Lycans, he said, though humans have many names for us. Werewolves, skinwalkers. My people, the Silvercrest Pack, are among the oldest bloodlines in North America. We've protected these lands since before the first European settlers arrived. Lyra tried to reconcile this revelation with everything she thought she knew about the world. Werewolves existed. They lived in packs. They had enemies, and one was sitting on her couch, wearing her spare clothes, after delivering his orphaned nephew to her doorstep. "Why me?" she asked, the most pressing question of all. "Out of anywhere you could have gone, why bring Elian here?" Dominic's amber eyes locked with hers. "Because I sensed you," he said simply. "Even wounded, even in wolf form, I could sense you from miles away. The connection between us is rare, ancient. My people call it anima vinculum." "Soul bond," Lyra translated automatically, drawing on her grandfather's research into indigenous languages. Dominic looked surprised. "Yes. How did you know?" "My grandfather was an anthropologist," she explained. "He studied native traditions throughout the Mojave. I grew up reading his journals." She paused. "He wrote about guardian spirits who could take the form of wolves, but I always thought they were just legends." "Not legends," Dominic said. "My ancestors often revealed themselves to those they trusted among the native peoples. Your grandfather must have earned their confidence." Lyra struggled to process this information. The scientific part of her mind demanded evidence, explanations, rational analysis. But she had seen the transformation with her own eyes. The evidence was sitting before her. "This bond," she said cautiously, "what exactly does it mean?" Dominic leaned forward, his expression intense. "Among my kind, it is the rarest of connections. A perfect resonance between souls. It transcends the physical. It allows for sharing of strength, of healing. Most Lycans live their entire lives without finding their anima. I had given up hope of ever finding mine." "And you think I'm your anima?" "I know you are. From the moment I caught your scent on the wind, I knew. It's why I was able to find you in the storm. It's why I trusted you with Elian when I could trust no one else. It's why my wolf form allowed you to touch me, to treat my wounds." The implications were staggering. Lyra rose from her chair, needing to move, to process. She paced the small confines of her living area. "This is impossible," she said. "I'm just a botanist, a researcher. I'm not part of some supernatural destiny." "And yet you saved me," Dominic said quietly. "You brought both Elian and me in from the storm when most humans would have run or called authorities. Some part of you recognized the truth, Lyra, whether your conscious mind accepts it or not." He was right. She had felt something from the first moment she saw the wolf's eyes, a recognition, a certainty that defied logic. And when he had transformed, that feeling had only intensified. Before she could respond, a soft cry came from the bedroom. Elian was awake. Lyra moved automatically toward the sound, but Dominic was faster, rising with fluid grace despite his recent ordeal. "May I?" he asked, pausing at the bedroom door. Lyra nodded, following behind. She watched as Dominic lifted the infant with practiced ease, cradling him against his broad chest. Elian immediately settled, recognizing his uncle even in human form. "He knows you," Lyra observed. "Yes, Lycan children are different from human infants, more aware, more connected to their surroundings. He understands far more than his age would suggest." As if to confirm this statement, Elian turned his head, fixing his deep blue eyes on Lyra. He reached out a tiny hand toward her, the crescent birthmark on his wrist clearly visible. "What does that mark mean?" Lyra asked, gently taking the small hand in hers. Dominic's expression grew solemn. "It's the mark of the Alpha bloodline. Elian is not just my nephew. He is the future of our pack, the son of my sister, who was to be the next Alpha after me." "After you? So you're—" "The Alpha of Silvercrest," Dominic confirmed. Or I was until Blackwood's attack. A rush of understanding swept through Lyra. Your wound. It wasn't just physical, was it? Dominic shook his head, his free hand moving to his side where the injury had been. It was inflicted by Xavier Blackwood himself. We call it the Black Blood, a poison that weakens the Alpha's connection to the pack, to the Earth itself. It's why I couldn't heal properly, even with my Lycan abilities. But you did heal, eventually, after I treated you. Because of you, Dominic corrected. Your touch, your care began the healing process. The anima bond fought against the poison, and when that human threatened you... His expression darkened at the memory of Harrison. The need to protect my anima gave me enough strength to shift back to human form. It broke through the poison's hold, at least temporarily. Lyra sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to absorb all these revelations. Her entire understanding of reality had shifted in a single night. And yet, strangely, she felt no fear. Only a growing sense of connection to this man, to the child he held, to a world she had never known existed. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Your enemies are still out there. Elian is still in danger." "We need to reach my territory," Dominic said. "The heart of Silvercrest land, in the mountains north of here. My pack will protect us, and there are rituals, ceremonies that can permanently neutralize the poison Blackwood used. But I can't do it alone, not in my weakened state." The implication was clear. He needed her to leave her research, her solitary existence, and plunge into his dangerous world. "I understand if this is too much to ask," he continued, reading her hesitation. "You didn't ask for any of this. I can find another way to—" "No," Lyra interrupted. The decision crystallized within her with surprising clarity. "I'm coming with you, both of you." The relief in Dominic's expression was palpable. "Thank you," he said simply. Elian cooed softly, as if adding his own gratitude. "We should leave before dawn," Dominic said, gently placing Elian back in his makeshift crib. "Blackwood's trackers will be searching. The storm bought us time, but not much." Lyra nodded, her mind already cataloging what they would need for the journey. Food, water, medical supplies, provisions for Elian. Her research could wait. For the first time in 3 years, something more important had entered her life. As she moved to prepare for their departure, a strange sense of purpose filled her. The emptiness that had haunted her since Harrison's rejection, since the doctor's devastating diagnosis, seemed to recede. In its place grew something new, something that felt remarkably like hope. The night passed in a blur of preparation. Lyra packed essentials with military efficiency, falling back on her training. Dominic regained strength with each passing hour, the poison's effects diminishing in her presence. Together, they cared for Elian, establishing a rhythm that felt strangely natural despite the extraordinary circumstances. In the quiet hours before dawn, as they waited for first light, Dominic stood at the window, scanning the horizon. His posture was alert, senses extended beyond human capability. "There's something I need to tell you," he said without turning. "About Harrison." Lyra stiffened at the name. "What about him?" "When he approached, I sensed something wrong, something beyond ordinary human malice." Dominic faced her now, his expression grave. "He carried the scent of wolfsbane and silver, hunter's tools." "What are you saying?" "Your former mate is not just a man who rejected you. He's a hunter, part of an organization that has tracked and killed my kind for centuries. They call themselves the Guardians." The revelation struck Lyra like a physical blow. Harrison? A hunter of werewolves? It seemed absurd. And yet, as she thought back to their relationship, small inconsistencies began to align. His frequent unexplained absences, the strange calls he would take in private, his family's mysterious security business that spanned generations. "That's not possible," she said, but her protest lacked conviction. "Think, Lyra, did he ever show particular interest in your grandfather's research, in the legends of the desert?" The memory surfaced immediately. Harrison had been fascinated by her grandfather's journals. had encouraged her to share the stories, the findings, had asked specific questions about the moon ceremonies, the guardian spirits. "Oh my God," she whispered. He was gathering information. Dominic nodded grimly. "The guardians have grown sophisticated over centuries. They infiltrate, study, prepare. They no longer hunt with torches and pitchforks, but with science and strategy." A horrible thought occurred to Lyra. Was he with me because of my grandfather's connection to your people? The pain in the question was evident. Dominic crossed to her, his movement fluid despite his recent injuries. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know this. Whatever brought you two together, whatever his motives, he made a terrible mistake when he rejected you, when he failed to see your true worth." The conviction in his voice, the warmth of his hands around hers, grounded Lyra in the present moment. The past could not be changed. The future, uncertain as it was, lay before them. "We should go," she said, rising from her chair. "The sun will be up soon." They moved with quiet efficiency. Dominic carried Elian, now securely wrapped and sleeping peacefully. Lyra shouldered their supplies and took one last look around the outpost. Her research notes were secured, samples properly stored. She had no idea when or if she would return. Outside, the pre-dawn air carried the sharp chill of the desert night. Lyra's old military surplus jeep stood ready, fueled and loaded. It wasn't the most comfortable transportation, but it was reliable and could handle the rough terrain between her outpost and the mountains Dominic had described. As the first pale light broke over the horizon, they left the outpost behind, heading north into the wilderness. The desert stretched before them, vast and seemingly empty. But Lyra now knew it contained secrets, hidden worlds she was only beginning to comprehend. They drove in comfortable silence for the first hour, Dominic alert beside her, Elian sleeping in a makeshift carrier between them. As the sun climbed higher, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber, Dominic spoke. "Your military training," he said. "Afghanistan, was it?" Lyra shot him a surprised glance. "How did you know I served?" "Your movements, your organizational habits, the way you packed, the way you check sightlines and exits. Combat medic?" "Yes," she confirmed. 2 tours, medical discharge after the last one." Dominic nodded. "I was there too. Different capacity." It was Lyra's turn to study him with new understanding. "Special forces?" A slight smile touched his lips. "Something like that. My kind have served in every American conflict, though our presence isn't recorded in your history books." "Wait," Lyra said, mind racing. "Are you saying there were werewolves in the U.S. military?" "We prefer lichen, but yes. We've always protected these lands long before they were called America. When your country formed, many of us saw military service as a natural extension of our protective nature." Lyra tried to process this revelation. "So you were in Afghanistan. When?" 2013 to 2015. Helmand Province mostly. Operation Enduring Freedom. A chill ran down Lyra's spine. "I was there, 2015. My unit was stationed at Forward Operating Base Griffin." Dominic went very still. "FOB Griffin," he repeated softly. "The attack on April 18th. The date registered like a physical blow. You know about that?" "I was there, Lyra. Not at the base itself, but nearby. My team was tracking insurgents in the mountains when we heard the explosion." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. "That was the day I was injured. The day I lost." She couldn't finish the sentence. Dominic's voice was gentle. "The day you were told you could never have children." Tears blurred her vision momentarily before she blinked them away. "How did you know that part?" "I didn't, not specifically, but many female animas share this trait, the inability to bear human children. It's part of the bond, though we don't fully understand why." Lyra pulled the jeep to a stop, needing to face him fully for this conversation. "Are you saying my infertility, the thing that made Harrison leave me, is because of some mystical werewolf bond I didn't even know existed?" Dominic met her gaze steadily. I'm saying that what human doctors interpret as a deficiency is actually something else entirely. Your body, your spirit, was preparing for a different path, a connection to my kind. The revelation was staggering. What she had viewed as brokenness, as failure, might actually be purpose, design. Before she could respond, Dominic suddenly tensed, his head snapping toward the eastern horizon. His nostrils flared, senses detecting something far beyond human perception. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Now!" Lyra didn't question him. She restarted the jeep and accelerated, sending a plume of dust behind them. "What is it?" "Vehicles. 3 of them, coming fast from the east. Guardians, most likely. Harrison must have reported our location." Fear shot through Lyra, but it was quickly replaced by determination. She had survived a war zone. She would survive this. "How far to your territory?" she asked, pushing the jeep faster over the rough terrain. 20 miles to the outer boundary, twice that to the heart of Silvercrest land, where we'll be truly safe." Elian stirred in his carrier, sensing the tension. Dominic placed a protective hand on the infant, steadying him as the vehicle bounced over the uneven ground. "Can you shift?" Lyra asked. "Back to wolf form? Would that help us?" Dominic shook his head. "Not yet. The poison is still in my system. The transformation you witnessed was fueled by desperation, by the need to protect you. It drained what little strength I had recovered." "Then we do this the human way," Lyra said, determination hardening her voice. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a compact 9mm pistol. "Military habits die hard." Dominic raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment on the weapon. "There," he said instead, pointing to a narrow canyon ahead. "That's the quickest route into the foothills. The entrance is hidden from the main roads." Lyra steered toward the indicated passage, the jeep's tires finding purchase on the increasingly rocky ground. The pursuit vehicles were visible now in her rearview mirror, 3 black SUVs cutting across the desert in a direct intercept course. "They're gaining," she said tersely. Dominic's expression darkened. "They'll try to cut us off before we reach the canyon. Once we're in Silvercrest territory, their advantage diminishes." "Then we make sure they don't stop us," Lyra replied, determination coursing through her veins. The canyon entrance loomed ahead, a narrow gap between towering stone walls. Behind them, the SUVs had spread out in a classic pursuit formation. The lead vehicle was close enough now that Lyra could see the glint of sunlight on windshields. "Hold on," she warned, bracing for the maneuver she was about to attempt. She waited until the last possible moment, then cut the wheels sharply, sending the jeep in a controlled slide toward the canyon entrance. The pursuing vehicles tried to adjust, but their heavier frames couldn't match the jeep's agility. The canyon walls closed around them, the passage barely wide enough for the jeep. Lyra navigated by instinct and Dominic's quiet directions, weaving deeper into the maze of stone. "They'll have to follow on foot from here," Dominic said as the passage narrowed further. "It will slow them, but not stop them." "How much farther to safety?" Lyra asked, eyes scanning for a path forward. 2 miles to the boundary marker. Once we cross it, my pack will sense our presence. They'll send scouts." The jeep rounded a sharp bend, and suddenly the passage opened into a small hidden valley. Ancient petroglyphs covered the stone walls, symbols Lyra recognized from her grandfather's research. Images of wolves, of hunters, of ceremonies beneath full moons. "The first crossing," Dominic said, his voice taking on a reverent quality. "For centuries, humans and lichens met here in peace to trade and share knowledge." Lyra slowed the vehicle, awed despite the danger at their backs. "My grandfather wrote about this place. He called it the Valley of Voices." "An apt name. The boundaries between worlds are thin here." At the far end of the valley, a stone arch stood sentinel, carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the dappled sunlight. Beyond it, pine-covered slopes rose toward distant peaks. "The boundary," Dominic confirmed, following her gaze. "Once through, we enter Silvercrest territory." They approached the arch slowly, the jeep's engine rumbling in the silence of the sacred space. As they passed beneath the ancient stone, Lyra felt a subtle shift in the air, a tingling sensation across her skin. Beside her, Dominic straightened, a new alertness in his posture. "They've sensed us," he said. "My pack knows we're here." No sooner had the words left his mouth than figures emerged from the tree line ahead. 3 massive wolves, their coats gleaming silver in the sunlight, flanked by 2 human forms carrying what appeared to be traditional bows. "Scouts," Dominic explained. "Stay calm. They'll recognize me, but your presence will confuse them. Let me speak first." Lyra brought the jeep to a stop, heart pounding. The wolves approached cautiously, their movements revealing the intelligence behind their amber eyes. One of them, slightly larger than the others, with a distinctive gray streak along its flank, moved ahead of the group. "Moira," Dominic said softly. "My cousin." The wolf's ears pricked forward at the sound of her name. She approached the driver's side window, eyes moving from Dominic to Lyra with unmistakable suspicion. "She's with me," Dominic said to the wolf. "She saved my life. And Elian's." At the mention of the baby, the wolf's demeanor changed. She stepped back, and before Lyra's astonished eyes, began to transform. The process was fluid, graceful, nothing like Dominic's painful, forced transformation. In moments, a woman stood where the wolf had been, draped in a simple robe provided by one of the human scouts. Moira was striking, with high cheekbones and eyes the same amber color as her wolf form. Her dark hair was streaked with the same distinctive gray that had marked her wolf's coat. "Dominic," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent Lyra couldn't place. "We thought you were dead. When the bond went silent." "Blackwood's poison," Dominic explained. "It severed my connection to the pack, to all of you." Moira's gaze shifted to Lyra, eyes narrowing. "And this human? Why have you brought her into our territory?" The suspicion in her voice was unmistakable. Lyra felt herself being evaluated, judged by standards she didn't understand. "She is my anima," Dominic said simply. The effect of his words was immediate. Moira stepped back as if struck. The other scouts exchanged glances, murmurs rippling through their ranks. "Impossible," Moira breathed. "No alpha has found an anima in 3 generations." "And yet, here she is," Dominic replied. His tone was gentle, but carried an unmistakable authority. "Lyra Morgan, combat medic, botanist, and the woman who saved both Elian and myself when we had nowhere else to turn." At the mention of Elian, Moira's expression softened. "The child lives? Serena's son?" "Yes. Sleeping now, but unharmed." Relief washed over Moira's features, momentarily displacing her suspicion of Lyra. "Thank the Ancient Ones. We must get you all to safety immediately. The Guardians have been swarming our outer territories for days, and Blackwood's pack grows bolder by the hour." "We were pursued," Lyra spoke for the first time. 3 vehicles, they're not far behind us." Moira's gaze snapped to her, reassessing. "Speak when spoken to, human. Your status has yet to be confirmed." Before Lyra could respond to the hostility, Dominic intervened. "Moira, she is my anima, and she will be accorded the respect that position demands. We can discuss protocols after we've reached the sanctuary." A tense silence followed, broken only when one of the other wolves gave a low, warning growl, head turned toward the canyon they had traveled through. "They're coming," Moira acknowledged. "We need to move now. Follow the marked trail. The inner circle will meet you at the moon pool." She turned to the other scouts, issuing rapid commands in a language Lyra didn't recognize. Within moments, the group had dispersed, melting into the forest with preternatural speed. "Drive," Dominic instructed Lyra. "Follow the trail ahead. It will take us deeper into Silvercrest territory, away from the Guardians." Lyra complied, guiding the jeep onto a narrow track that wound between ancient pines. As they drove deeper into the forest, the quality of light changed, filtered through the dense canopy into dappled patterns that played across the hood of the vehicle. "Your cousin seems less than thrilled about me," Lyra observed after several minutes of silence. Dominic sighed. "Moira was raised to believe she might one day be my anima. It's not uncommon for alphas to bond with those of strong bloodlines within the pack. Finding my true anima outside the pack, a human no less, challenges everything she's been taught to expect. "So I've stumbled into pack politics as well as an ancient war," Lyra said wryly. "Anything else I should know before we arrive?" Dominic's expression grew serious. "The path ahead won't be easy, Lyra. The role of Alpha's anima carries great responsibility. There will be those who question your worthiness, your ability to fulfill the role. There will be tests." "Tests? What kind of tests?" "The rites of anima, ancient ceremonies to confirm our bond, to complete it." Something in his tone made her glance at him sharply. "Complete it? What exactly does that involve?" Before he could answer, the forest opened into a breathtaking clearing. At its center lay a perfect circular pool, its surface mirroring the sky above. Surrounding it in a half-circle stood 7 figures, each bearing a staff topped with a carved wolf's head. "The inner circle of Silvercrest," Dominic said quietly. "The pack elders. They will judge whether you are truly my anima, whether our bond is genuine." "And if they decide I'm not?" Lyra asked, suddenly apprehensive. Dominic's amber eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Then we lose our best chance at saving both Elian and myself from what's coming." The weight of responsibility settled on Lyra's shoulders like a physical burden. She was no longer just a woman who had helped a wounded wolf and an orphaned child. She was potentially the key to their entire future, to the survival of a world she was only beginning to understand. As the jeep rolled to a stop at the edge of the clearing, Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself for whatever came next. She had survived war. She had survived heartbreak. She had survived isolation. She would survive this too, whatever it brought. The elders watched their approach with unreadable expressions, ancient eyes evaluating the newcomers. Behind them, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the ceremony that would determine the fate of not just Lyra and Dominic, but of the entire Silvercrest pack, and perhaps the balance between the human and lichen worlds. The ritual was about to begin. Lyra stepped from the jeep, acutely aware of 7 pairs of ancient eyes studying her every movement. The elders of the Silvercrest pack stood in solemn formation around the moon pool, their staffs planted firmly in the earth. The carved wolf heads that topped each staff seemed to watch her with the same scrutiny as their bearers. Dominic emerged beside her, lifting Elian gently from his carrier. The baby remained peaceful, even in sleep, somehow aware they had reached safety. Moira materialized from the tree line, now fully clothed in what appeared to be ceremonial garments of soft leather, adorned with silver symbols. "Alpha Dominic Ravenwood," intoned the central elder, a white-haired man whose weathered face bore the map of centuries. "You returned to us when many believed you lost." Dominic inclined his head respectfully. "Elder Thaddeus, I've returned, but not without cost." "So we have felt," the elder replied. "The severing of the Alpha bond sent ripples through the entire pack. Many fell ill. Some nearly died." Guilt flashed across Dominic's features. "Blackwood's poison was effective. It would have killed me if not for Lyra." At the mention of her name, all eyes shifted to her. Lyra felt the weight of their collective gaze like a physical pressure. "So this is the human you claim as anima," Thaddeus said, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp with assessment. "Step forward, Lyra Morgan." Dominic gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. Drawing on the discipline that had carried her through combat zones, Lyra approached the circle of elders, stopping at the edge of the moon pool. Its waters were perfectly still, reflecting her image with uncanny clarity. "You stand before the inner circle of Silvercrest," Thaddeus continued. "We who have guarded the ancient ways since before this land had a name. You claim the sacred position of Alpha's anima. Do you understand what this means?" "No," Lyra answered honestly. "I know only what Dominic has told me, that there is a bond between us, that it allowed me to help heal him when nothing else could." A murmur rippled through the assembled elders. Lyra couldn't tell if her candor had impressed or offended them. "At least she does not pretend knowledge she does not possess," observed a female elder to Thaddeus's right. Her silver hair was braided with feathers and small crystals that caught the light. "Truth is the foundation of the anima bond, Tamara," Thaddeus acknowledged. but knowledge must follow. He returned his attention to Lyra. The role you claim is sacred among our kind. The anima completes the alpha, balances their power, grounds their spirit to both worlds. I'm not claiming anything, Lyra said firmly. I'm a scientist, a researcher. 3 days ago, I didn't know your kind existed. I only know that when Dominic and Elian needed help, I couldn't turn away. Whatever bond exists between us, it wasn't something I sought out or expected. Yet here you stand, Thaddeus observed, and you must be tested. The rites of anima will reveal the truth of your connection to our alpha. Dominic stepped forward, Elian still cradled in his arms. Elder Thaddeus, Lyra has already proven herself by saving both myself and the pack's heir. The traditional rites can wait until— They cannot wait, interrupted a stern-faced elder with a single streak of black in his white beard. Blackwood's forces gather. The Guardians encroach on our territory. If she is truly your anima, her power must be awakened now, while the moon waxes toward fullness. Tension filled the clearing. Lyra sensed an undercurrent of politics and power struggles that went far beyond her understanding of pack dynamics. What exactly do these rites involve? She asked, addressing the elders directly. Tamara answered, her voice gentler than the others. 3 trials to test the foundations of the anima bond. The trial of blood, to test your physical connection. The trial of memory, to test your spiritual connection. And the trial of will, to test your soul's commitment to the alpha and the pack. And if I fail? The silence that followed was answer enough. Dominic moved to her side, his presence a reassuring warmth. She will not fail, he stated with quiet certainty. The bond between us is real. Then let the trials commence, Thaddeus declared, beginning at moonrise with the trial of blood. Moira stepped forward, arms extended. I will take the child, she said, looking at Elian in Dominic's arms. He should rest in proper quarters, not in this clearing. Though her words were reasonable, something in Moira's tone set Lyra on edge, a possessiveness perhaps, or a hint of the resentment Dominic had mentioned. I'll take him, offered another voice. A young woman emerged from the tree line, her features softer than Moira's, but with the same amber eyes that marked all the lichens. I've prepared the nursery in anticipation of his arrival. This is Nadia, Dominic explained to Lyra, my sister's closest friend. She was to be Elian's caretaker if anything happened to Serena. The simple introduction contained volumes of grief and loss. Lyra watched as Dominic carefully transferred the sleeping infant to Nadia's waiting arms. He's been through so much, Nadia whispered, tears gathering in her eyes as she looked down at Elian. But he's home now. Yes, Dominic agreed softly. We're home. With a respectful nod to the elders, Nadia carried Elian away, disappearing into the dense forest surrounding the clearing. The human requires preparation for the trials, Thaddeus announced. Elder Tamara will guide her. Alpha, you must undergo purification to cleanse the remnants of Blackwood's poison from your system. Dominic hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Lyra alone among strangers who viewed her with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. It's all right, Lyra assured him, summoning confidence she didn't entirely feel. I've faced worse than some ceremonial trials. His amber eyes held hers for a long moment. Trust your instincts, he said quietly. Whatever happens, remember that the bond between us is real. It will guide you. With that cryptic advice, he allowed 2 of the male elders to lead him away toward a path that disappeared into the rocky hillside above the clearing. Tamara approached Lyra, her expression inscrutable. Come, child. We have much to do before moonrise. Lyra followed the elder along a different path, this one winding deeper into the ancient forest. The trees here were impossibly old, their massive trunks wider than Lyra's arms could encircle, their canopies creating a cathedral-like space beneath. You said you're a scientist, Tamara observed as they walked. Yes, a botanist. I study desert plants and their survival adaptations. How fitting, the elder murmured. The anima often brings complementary knowledge to the pack, life and growth to balance the alpha's protective nature. They emerged into another clearing, smaller than the one with the moon pool. At its center stood a circular structure built of stone and living wood, the trees seeming to have grown into and around the building rather than being cut to accommodate it. "The Temple of the First Anima," Tamara explained. "It is here that all anima trials begin." Inside, the temple was a single circular chamber, its walls lined with intricate carvings depicting wolves and humans in various scenes. A central fire pit contained glowing embers, filling the space with warmth and the sweet scent of cedar. "Disrobe," Tamara instructed matter-of-factly. "The ritual garments are there." She indicated a simple tunic of undyed linen laid across a stone bench. Lyra hesitated only briefly before complying. Her military service had stripped away any excessive modesty long ago. She changed quickly, the soft fabric settling against her skin with unexpected weight. "The cloth is woven with silver thread," Tamara explained, noting Lyra's surprise. "It helps to focus the energy of the trials." The elder guided Lyra to sit on a mat near the fire pit. From a small pouch at her waist, she withdrew a handful of herbs which she cast into the embers. Green-blue flames leapt up, releasing a sharp, clarifying scent that reminded Lyra of sage and something wilder. "Now," Tamara said, settling across from her, "tell me how you came to find our Alpha. The full truth, child. The sacred smoke reveals all falsehoods." Lyra recounted the events of the past days, from the storm's arrival to their journey to Silvercrest territory. She omitted nothing, not even her initial skepticism and fear when confronted with the impossible reality of Dominic's transformation. When she finished, Tamara studied her in silence for several long moments. "Your words ring true," she finally said. "But truth alone is not enough. The anima bond is complex, layered. It existed long before you became aware of it." "What do you mean?" "The true anima is not chosen, but recognized. The bond forms at first meeting, but it may lie dormant for years, even decades, until circumstances awaken it." A strange suspicion formed in Lyra's mind. "Are you saying Dominic and I might have met before? That's not possible. I would remember." Tamara smiled enigmatically. "Would you? Memory is a curious thing, especially when shaped by trauma." The elder rose gracefully to her feet before Lyra could question her further. "It is time for the first preparation, the cleansing of the body." From an alcove in the wall, Tamara retrieved a wooden bowl filled with a viscous liquid that shimmered with an inner light. "Remove your garment," she instructed. "The sacred oil must touch your skin directly." Once again, Lyra complied, standing naked before the elder. Tamara dipped her fingers into the bowl and began to draw symbols on Lyra's skin, starting with her forehead and working downward. The oil was surprisingly warm, almost hot, leaving tingling pathways wherever it touched. "These are the ancient marks of the anima," Tamara explained as she worked. "They prepare your body to receive and channel the power of the bond. Without them, the trial of blood could prove fatal." "Fatal?" Lyra questioned, alarmed despite her resolve to remain calm. "The first trial tests your physical compatibility with Lycan essence. If you are truly Dominic's anima, his blood will resonate with yours, strengthening both. If not—" Tamara's hands paused their methodical work. "The rejection is violent and often deadly." Lyra absorbed this information with growing concern. "Has anyone ever survived failing the trial?" "Few. Those who did were never the same afterward." The implications were clear. These trials were not symbolic rituals or simple tests. They were potentially lethal challenges that would determine not just her status among the pack, but her very survival. As Tamara continued applying the sacred oil, Lyra found her thoughts turning to Dominic. What was happening to him during his purification? Was he undergoing something equally dangerous? "The Alpha's path is different, but no less perilous," Tamara said, seemingly reading her thoughts. "The poison Blackwood used attacks the very essence of what makes him Alpha. The purification ritual will drive it from his system completely, but the process is unpleasant." "You mean painful," Lyra translated. "Excruciating," Tamara corrected, "but necessary. His strength must be at its peak for the trials ahead, for both your sakes." When the elder had finished marking Lyra's body with the ancient symbols, she handed her a robe of silvery material that felt cool against her oil-covered skin. "Rest now," Tamara advised. "Moonrise comes in a few hours. You will need your strength." Left alone in the temple, Lyra tried to follow the elder's advice, but her mind raced with all she had learned, all that was at stake. Somewhere in this strange, hidden territory, Dominic was suffering through his own preparation. Elian was being cared for by people she barely knew, and Harrison, no, not just Harrison, but the Guardians, were hunting them, along with Xavier Blackwood's rival pack. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her. 3 days ago, her greatest concern had been analyzing soil samples and recording growth patterns of desert plants. Now she was preparing to undergo potentially lethal trials to prove herself the mystical soulmate of a werewolf alpha. Despite the absurdity of it all, Lyra felt no desire to flee. Something deeper than logic, more primal than reason, told her she was exactly where she needed to be. The connection she felt to Dominic, to Elian, to this hidden world she'd stumbled into, it felt right in a way nothing had since before her injury. She dozed fitfully, strange dreams flickering through her consciousness, images of mountains she'd never seen, forests she'd never walked, faces she didn't recognize yet somehow knew. And through it all, a persistent sense of recognition, of homecoming. She awoke to Tamara's gentle touch on her shoulder. The elder's expression was solemn. "It is time," she said simply. Outside, the forest had transformed in the gathering darkness. Luminescent fungi glowed along the pathway, providing just enough light to guide their steps back to the moon pool. The air vibrated with tension and anticipation. The clearing was no longer empty. Dozens of pack members lined the edges, their faces illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows across the ground. The 7 elders once again formed their half-circle around the pool, but now they wore elaborate ceremonial robes adorned with silver symbols that matched those Tamara had painted on Lyra's skin. At the far edge of the pool stood Dominic. The transformation in him was startling. Gone was any trace of weakness or lingering injury. He stood tall and powerful, bare-chested despite the cool night air, his skin marked with symbols that mirrored Lyra's own. His amber eyes seemed to glow with an inner light as they fixed on her, filled with a mixture of concern and fierce determination. "Approach the pool, Lyra Morgan," Thaddeus commanded, his voice carrying across the now silent clearing. Lyra moved forward, acutely aware of the eyes upon her. She stopped at the edge of the perfectly still water, its surface now reflecting the rising full moon overhead. "The trial of blood begins," Thaddeus announced. "Alpha, take your place." Dominic moved to stand opposite Lyra across the moon pool. Between them, the water gleamed silver in the moonlight, unnaturally still despite the light breeze that stirred the trees. "The blood of the Alpha carries the essence of the pack, the legacy of our ancestors, the power of our future," Thaddeus intoned. "Only the true anima can share in this essence without being destroyed by it." The elder with the streaked beard approached Dominic, carrying a ceremonial dagger of polished silver. Without hesitation, Dominic extended his arm. The elder made a swift cut across his palm, deep enough that blood welled immediately, black in the moonlight. Dominic knelt and placed his bleeding hand into the moon pool. The moment his blood touched the water, it began to change. Ripples of silver light spread outward from his hand, transforming the clear water into something luminous and strange. Tamara approached Lyra, carrying an identical dagger. "Your blood must join his," she explained quietly. "If you are truly his anima, the waters will accept your offering, and the bond will be strengthened. If not—" She left the consequence unspoken, but Lyra understood. Failure meant rejection. Rejection meant death. With steady hands, Lyra accepted the dagger. The blade was surprisingly warm against her skin, almost alive. She drew it across her palm in one swift motion, feeling only a momentary sting before blood welled from the wound. Kneeling at the pool's edge as Dominic had done, she extended her bleeding hand toward the now glowing water. Time seemed to slow as her blood dripped from her palm, falling in perfect spheres toward the silver surface. The moment her blood touched the water, pain erupted through her body. not the localized sting of the cut, but a systemic agony that seemed to set every nerve ending aflame. She gasped, vision blurring, fighting to remain upright as the sensation coursed through her. Across the pool, Dominic's expression tightened. He was feeling it too, she realized, her pain mirrored in his body through their connection. The water between them began to churn, the silvery glow intensifying to a brilliant light that illuminated the entire clearing. Within the luminescence, their blood mingled, forming patterns that shifted and changed with hypnotic complexity. Through the pain came something else, knowledge, flooding into Lyra's consciousness like a breaking dam. Images, sensations, memories that weren't her own. The feeling of running on 4 legs through moonlit forests. The taste of the wind carrying 1,000 scents. The sound of a pack howling in perfect harmony. Dominic's experiences, his wolf's experiences, pouring into her mind and merging with her own. The agony peaked, pushing Lyra to the edge of consciousness. Just as she thought she might collapse, the pain transformed. The burning became warmth, the agony transmuted to strength flowing into her body. Her vision cleared, sharpened, colors becoming more vivid, scents more distinct. The glow in the water gradually subsided, leaving the pool once again still and clear. But something had fundamentally changed. Lyra could feel it in her bones, in the beating of her heart, in the very essence of who she was. She raised her eyes to meet Dominic's across the water. What she saw there stole her breath. He was looking at her with wonder, with recognition deeper than words could express, with a connection that transcended the physical world. "Rise, Lyra Morgan," Thaddeus commanded, his voice gentle now. "You have passed the trial of blood." As she got to her feet, Lyra noticed the cut on her palm had completely healed, leaving only a thin silver scar in the shape of a crescent moon. Across the pool, an identical mark now adorned Dominic's palm. A murmur ran through the watching pack members. Approval? Surprise? Lyra couldn't tell, her senses still overwhelmed by the changes wrought by the trial. "The waters have accepted your blood," Thaddeus announced. "The physical bond is confirmed, but 2 trials remain before you can truly claim the title of Anima." Dominic circled the pool to stand at Lyra's side, his presence a steadying force amid the strangeness of the ceremony. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying concern. "I think so," Lyra replied, still trying to process the flood of sensations and knowledge that had poured into her. "Everything feels different." "The trial of blood awakens latent abilities in the anima," Dominic explained. "Enhanced senses, accelerated healing, a taste of what it means to be Lycan without the full transformation." Before Lyra could question him further, the elder called Tamara stepped forward. "The next trial must wait until dawn," she announced. "The trial of memory requires the light of the rising sun." The assembled pack began to disperse, moving back into the forest in small groups. The tension of the ceremony gradually dissipated, replaced by a more communal atmosphere. Several pack members approached to offer quiet congratulations to Dominic, though most still regarded Lyra with cautious curiosity rather than acceptance. "Come," Dominic said, gently guiding Lyra away from the pool. "You need to rest and recover. The trial of memory will be challenging in different ways." "What exactly does it involve?" Lyra asked, as they followed a path illuminated by the same bioluminescent fungi she had noticed earlier. Dominic's expression grew serious. "The trial of memory tests the spiritual connection between Alpha and Anima. It requires you to access memories, mine, yours, perhaps even those of our ancestors, that confirm the bond between us." "Memories of what?" "That's the challenge. Neither of us knows what the trial will reveal. The elders say it shows each pair something different, something specific to their unique bond." They arrived at a small, elegant cabin nestled among ancient pines. Inside, it was surprisingly modern, with clean lines and simple furnishings that complemented rather than fought against the natural setting. "These are my quarters," Dominic explained. "As Alpha, I live somewhat apart from the main pack compound." Lyra noticed a second door off the main living area. "Is that where Elian is?" Dominic nodded. "Nadia will have put him to bed in the nursery. Would you like to check on him?" Together, they quietly entered the darkened room. Elian slept peacefully in a beautifully carved wooden crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep slumber. The crescent birthmark on his wrist seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, echoing the new scar on Lyra's palm. "He's so peaceful," Lyra whispered, "after everything he's been through." "Children of the pack are remarkably resilient," Dominic replied softly, "and he senses he's home, surrounded by his kind, by those who will protect him at all costs." As they watched the sleeping infant, Lyra felt a surge of protective instinct so powerful it took her breath away. This child, this pack, this man beside her, they had become hers to defend, to nurture, to support in ways she couldn't fully articulate. They withdrew, leaving Elian to his rest. In the main room, Dominic moved to a small kitchen area and poured water into 2 cups from a ceramic pitcher. "You should drink," he advised, handing one to Lyra. "The trial of blood depletes fluids and electrolytes." She accepted the cup gratefully, suddenly aware of a powerful thirst. The water tasted incredibly sweet and pure, like nothing she'd experienced before. "Your senses are heightened," Dominic explained, noting her surprise. "It's part of the anima awakening. Food, water, scents, everything will be more intense for a while, until you adjust." Lyra set down her empty cup, questions flooding her mind. "You keep saying anima awakening as if this was always a part of me, just dormant. But 3 days ago, I had never met you. I didn't know your kind existed." Dominic's expression grew thoughtful. "The anima bond doesn't follow human logic or timelines, Lyra. Some believe it exists outside of time entirely, that those destined to be bonded are connected from birth, regardless of when they physically meet." "That sounds like mysticism, not science," Lyra observed. "Perhaps," he acknowledged with a small smile. "But consider this from a scientific perspective. When we met, when you found me injured at your door, did you feel as if you already knew me somehow? Did you trust me despite every rational reason not to?" Lyra couldn't deny the truth in his words. From that first moment when their eyes had met during the storm, she had felt a recognition that defied explanation. "There's something else," Dominic continued, his tone more serious now. "Something Tamara may have hinted at during your preparation. She suggested we might have met before, but that's impossible." "Is it?" He moved to sit across from her, his amber eyes intent on her face. "Think back to Afghanistan. April 18th, 2015, the day of the attack on FOB Griffin." Lyra's breath caught. The memories of that day remained fragmented, distorted by trauma and pain. The explosion, the dust and screams, the weight of debris pinning her down, the blood, so much blood, not all of it from others. "I was wounded," she said slowly, "trapped under collapsed walls after the initial blast. The medical tent was hit directly. What do you remember about being rescued?" Lyra frowned, trying to pierce the fog that surrounded those memories. "Not much. I was in and out of consciousness. I remember hands digging me out, carrying me, a voice telling me to hold on." Her frown deepened. "Amber eyes." The realization struck her like a physical blow. "It was you," she whispered. "You were there. You found me in the rubble." Dominic nodded slowly. "My team was operating in the mountains nearby when we intercepted chatter about the planned attack. We couldn't get there in time to prevent it, but we arrived during the aftermath." "But you weren't with any regular military unit. You said your kind has served secretly." "A special operations group composed entirely of Lycans," Dominic confirmed. "We operate beyond the boundaries of conventional forces. Our abilities make us particularly effective in hostile territory." Lyra struggled to reconcile this new information with her fractured memories of that terrible day. "If you rescued me, why don't I remember you clearly? Why didn't you recognize me when we met at my outpost?" "You were critically injured, barely conscious, and I was in partial shift, a state between human and wolf that enhances our physical abilities while maintaining human form. It's a closely guarded combat technique." He leaned forward, his expression intense. As for why I didn't recognize you immediately at your outpost, the Blackwood's poison affected more than my physical strength. It clouded my senses, dulled my memories. It was only when your scent, your essence penetrated that fog, that the recognition began to form. So you're saying our bond actually formed 5 years ago in Afghanistan? I believe it did, Dominic said softly. The moment I pulled you from the rubble, something shifted between us. I didn't understand it then. How could I? Finding an anima is so rare that most Lycans consider it a legend rather than a possibility. Lyra stood, needing to move, to process this revelation. This is why the trial of memory is next, isn't it? To recover what was forgotten, to confirm what you're suggesting. Yes, if I'm right, the trial will restore both our memories of that first meeting. It will complete the spiritual connection that began then. A thought struck Lyra, one that sent a chill through her despite the cabin's warmth. The injury that left me unable to have children, it happened during that attack. You said infertility is common in animus, that it's somehow connected to the bond. Dominic's expression softened with compassion. The legends say that the anima's body prepares itself for the bond, channels its energy toward different forms of creation and nurturing than human reproduction. I don't know if your injury was coincidence or somehow part of the bond asserting itself. The trial of memory may reveal that truth as well. The weight of these revelations settled on Lyra's shoulders. If Dominic was right, if their initial bond had formed during the most traumatic moment of her life, what other connections might exist that she couldn't yet see? A soft cry from the nursery interrupted her thoughts. Elian was awake. Dominic rose immediately, but Lyra placed a hand on his arm. "Let me," she said softly. In the nursery, Elian blinked up at her with his impossible blue eyes, so aware for one so young. When she lifted him, he settled against her with complete trust, tiny fingers curling around a lock of her hair. "Hello, little one," she murmured, rocking him gently. As she held him, a strange certainty bloomed within her. Whatever these trials revealed, whatever dangers still pursued them, she belonged here, with this child, with Dominic, with this pack that was still evaluating her worthiness. The trial of blood had changed her physically, awakening abilities she was only beginning to understand. The trial of memory would challenge her understanding of her own past, her connection to Dominic, and beyond that lay the final test, the trial of will. Lyra didn't yet know what it would entail, but she sensed it would be the most difficult of all. It would require her to make a choice, to commit to this new life and all it entailed. As she stood in the quiet nursery, Elian's warm weight against her chest, Lyra found herself strangely unafraid. Whatever came next, she would face it, not just for Dominic or Elian, but for herself, for the woman she was becoming, the anima she might truly be. Dawn was approaching. The trial of memory waited with its revelations and challenges. But in this moment, holding this child who had come to her through impossible circumstances, Lyra felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She was exactly where she needed to be. The first light of dawn painted the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold as Lyra stepped from Dominic's cabin. She had barely slept, her mind racing with revelations and questions. The few hours of rest she'd managed had been filled with fragmented dreams, images of dust and blood in Afghanistan mingling with glimpses of amber eyes and strong hands pulling her from darkness. Dominic walked beside her, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. If what he believed was true, they had met years before, forming a bond neither fully understood until now. The trial of memory would either confirm or disprove this theory, bringing clarity to the strange connection between them. "What should I expect?" Lyra asked as they followed the path back toward the moon pool. "The trial of memory is different for each pair," Dominic replied. "For some, it's a gentle merging of minds and memories. For others, it can be intense, disorienting." "That's not exactly comforting," Lyra observed wryly. A faint smile touched his lips. "If it helps, I'll be experiencing it alongside you. Whatever memories surface, whatever truths are revealed, we'll face them together." They walked in silence for several minutes, the forest gradually awakening around them. Birds called from the canopy, small creatures rustled in the underbrush, and the scent of pine and earth filled Lyra's heightened senses. Elian seemed content with Nadia, she said, breaking the silence. The infant had been peaceful when they left him, curled in the arms of Dominic's sister's friend, tiny fingers wrapped around a silver rattle. Nadia has always had a gift with cubs, Dominic said. Children, I mean. She was to be Serena's midwife before... His voice trailed off, grief briefly shadowing his features. You haven't had time to mourn her properly, Lyra realized. Your sister. Dominic's jaw tightened. There will be time for mourning after we've secured Elian's safety, after Blackwood and his allies are defeated. The determination in his voice was underlaid with a deep current of pain and rage. Lyra understood then that the Alpha's control was not just a matter of discipline, it was necessary. The depth of his emotions, if fully unleashed, would be overwhelming. They reached the moon pool just as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern mountains. The clearing was different in the dawn light, less mysterious, more sacred. The 7 elders were already assembled, including Tamara, who offered Lyra a small nod of encouragement. The trial of memory begins with the rising sun, Thaddeus announced, when the light of renewal touches the sacred waters. Unlike the previous night, no other pack members were present. The trial of memory, it seemed, was a more private affair, witnessed only by the elders who would judge its outcome. Alpha and Anima candidate, take your places, Thaddeus directed, indicating 2 flat stones positioned at the edge of the pool, facing each other across the still water. Lyra and Dominic moved to their assigned positions. As she settled onto the cool stone, Lyra noticed intricate spiraling patterns carved into its surface, ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with energy beneath her fingers. The trial of memory seeks truth beyond conscious thought, Thaddeus explained. It reveals the bonds that transcend time and space, the connections that exist between souls destined to walk the same path. Elder Tamara approached, carrying a shallow wooden bowl filled with what appeared to be clear water. She dipped her fingers into it and drew a symbol on Lyra's forehead, a complex pattern that felt cool against her skin. The waters of remembering, Tamara said softly. They will guide your journey. She performed the same ritual for Dominic before returning to her place in the semicircle of elders. Extend your hands over the pool, Thaddeus instructed. Let the sacred waters reflect what lies within. Lyra stretched her arms forward, palms down over the surface of the moon pool. Dominic mirrored her actions from the opposite side. Between them, the water began to shimmer with the same silver luminescence she had witnessed during the trial of blood. Now we begin, Thaddeus intoned. Look into the waters, see beyond what is visible, remember what has been forgotten. Lyra focused on the rippling surface below her hands. The silver light intensified, swirling into patterns that made her eyes blur and her head swim. A strange vertigo gripped her, as if she were falling forward into the pool itself. Then everything changed. The clearing, the elders, even the physical sensation of sitting on the stone, all disappeared. In their place came blinding sunlight, scorching heat, and the acrid smell of smoke and explosives. Afghanistan. The memory engulfed her completely, so vivid she could feel the grit of sand against her skin, taste dust in her mouth. She was back at FOB Griffin on that fateful day, but this time she was experiencing it with a clarity her traumatized mind had previously blocked. She saw herself moving through the medical tent, checking supplies, joking with a fellow medic. The mundane moments before disaster struck, preserved with perfect fidelity. Then came the explosion, not as she had experienced it, semi-conscious and trapped, but from outside. From Dominic's perspective, she felt his body moving with supernatural speed across rocky terrain, felt the shift of muscle and bone as he maintained the partial transformation that enhanced his strength and senses without revealing his true nature. She experienced his horror as the plume of smoke and debris rose from the base, felt his desperate determination as he pushed himself beyond normal limits to reach the wounded. The memory shifted, becoming even more immediate. Now she saw through Dominic's eyes as he tore through rubble, following scents and sounds imperceptible to human senses. She felt his focus narrow as he detected a faint heartbeat beneath a collapsed wall. Her heartbeat. With his enhanced strength, he lifted debris that would have required multiple men, finally uncovering her broken body. The sight hit him with unexpected force, not just professional concern for a wounded soldier, but something deeper, more visceral. The moment he touched her, something impossible happened. A connection formed, electric and undeniable. Though neither of them consciously recognized it, the bond that would later be identified as anima vinculum sparked into existence. The memory fragmented, shifting perspective again. Now Lyra experienced her own semi-conscious recollections, the sensation of strong arms lifting her, of amber eyes meeting hers briefly before darkness claimed her, the overwhelming feeling of safety despite her injuries, of being found when she thought herself lost. The scene dissolved, replaced by the sterile environment of a field hospital. She saw herself, unconscious and surrounded by medical equipment. And in the shadows, watching from just outside the tent, stood Dominic. His expression reflected confusion and reluctance to leave, though duty called him back to his mission. Before departing, he approached her bedside while the attending medics were distracted. He placed his hand over hers for the briefest moment, an instinctive gesture he didn't fully understand. The contact seemed to stabilize her vital signs, though he had no way of knowing the true significance of what had transpired. Then he was gone, returning to his secret war in the mountains, carrying with him the inexplicable memory of a connection he couldn't explain or forget. The vision shifted once more, jumping forward in time. Lyra saw herself in a hospital in Germany, receiving the devastating news about her reproductive injuries. But now, with her enhanced awareness, she perceived something the doctors could not. The subtle alteration in her cellular structure, the realignment of energy that marked the beginning of her transformation into an anima. The injury that had seemed like cruel fate was revealed as something more complex, partly the result of physical trauma, yes, but also her body's response to the nascent bond with a lichen alpha, a redirection of life energy toward a different purpose than human reproduction. Understanding flooded through her. What had once seemed like a devastating loss was revealed as a necessary transformation, not less, but different, not broken, but becoming. The visions accelerated, showing both their lives over the intervening years. Dominic leading his pack, carrying the strange memory of a human woman whose essence had called to something primal within him. Lyra in her desert outpost, unknowingly settling in territory adjacent to Silvercrest lands, drawn by forces she didn't recognize. Then came the attack that had killed Dominic's sister. The visions became chaotic, violent, Blackwood's forces ambushing Serena as she attempted to flee with infant Elian. Dominic arriving too late to save his sister, but managing to escape with his nephew. The poisoned wound that severed his connection to his pack, but ironically, heightened his ability to sense his long-dormant bond with Lyra. His desperate journey through the desert, following a pull he couldn't explain but instinctively trusted. The storm that should have killed both him and Elian, but instead delivered them to the one person who could save them. The visions faded, and Lyra found herself once again seated at the edge of the moon pool. Her cheeks were wet with tears she didn't remember shedding. Across from her, Dominic's expression reflected the same overwhelming emotion, the same newfound understanding. Between them, the water had stilled, its surface once again clear and reflective. "You have walked the paths of memory," Thaddeus said quietly. "What truth have you found there?" Lyra's voice was steady despite her tears. "Our bond began 5 years ago in Afghanistan. When Dominic rescued me after the attack on FOB Griffin, something connected us, something neither of us fully understood until now. The injury I believed had broken me was actually part of my transformation," she continued, wonder coloring her words. "My body was changing, preparing for a role I didn't know existed." Dominic spoke next, his amber eyes never leaving hers. "The connection drew us together across time and distance. It guided me to her when all seemed lost. when Blackwood's poison should have killed both me and Elian. Thaddeus nodded slowly. The trial of memory has confirmed the spiritual bond. Two souls recognized across time, finding each other when need was greatest. He turned to his fellow elders. What say you to the completion of the second trial? One by one, the elders voiced their affirmation. Even the stern-faced elder with the streaked beard, who had seemed most skeptical of Lyra, inclined his head in acknowledgement. The trial of memory is complete, Thaddeus declared. The bond of spirit is confirmed. Only the trial of will remains. Lyra rose from the stone seat, legs unsteady after the intense experience. Dominic was immediately at her side, his hand at her elbow offering support. The final trial will commence at sunset, Thaddeus continued. Until then, rest and prepare yourselves. The trial of will tests not just the strength of your bond, but your commitment to the responsibilities it entails. As the elders dispersed, Tamara approached Lyra. The memories you recovered were powerful, she observed. They have changed you in ways you are only beginning to understand. I feel different, Lyra admitted. More connected to everything, to Dominic, to the pack, even to this place. The anima bond continues to awaken within you, Tamara explained. Each trial strengthens it, reveals more of its nature. By sunset, you will be ready for the final challenge. Dominic's hand found Lyra's, their fingers intertwining naturally. The silver scars on their palms, legacies of the trial of blood, aligned perfectly, sending a pleasant warmth up her arm. What exactly is the trial of will? Lyra asked. What will be required of us? Tamara's expression grew serious. It is the most difficult of the three, for it requires absolute truth between you. No secrets, no hesitation, no doubt. It will test your willingness to accept the full responsibilities of the anima bond. Which are? To stand beside the Alpha, not just in times of peace, but in battle, to help lead and protect the pack, even at risk to yourself, to use your unique gifts in service of our people and our future. The elder's gaze grew penetrating. The trial of will requires sacrifice, Lyra Morgan. The question is whether you are prepared to make it. With that cryptic warning, Tamara left them, following the path back into the forest. Well, that wasn't ominous at all, Lyra remarked, trying to lighten the sudden tension. Dominic's expression remained serious. The trial of will is not to be taken lightly. It has broken pairs that survived the first two trials, shattered bonds that seemed unbreakable. What kind of sacrifice are we talking about? He shook his head. It's different for each pair. The trial manifests based on our specific circumstances, our deepest fears and hesitations. A cold apprehension settled in Lyra's stomach. So we have no way to prepare? Only by being honest with ourselves and each other. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, soothing despite his words. No more secrets between us, Lyra. Not if we want to survive what's coming. They walked back toward the Alpha's cabin, both lost in thought. The revelations of the trial of memory had answered many questions, but new ones had taken their place. What sacrifice would the trial of will demand? What decision would Lyra be forced to make? As they approached the cabin, a figure emerged from the tree line. Moira, Dominic's cousin. Her expression was tense, her movements agitated. "Alpha," she called, hurrying toward them. "We have a situation." Dominic straightened, instantly alert. "What is it?" "Our scouts report movement at the western boundary. Blackwood's forces are gathering, at least 20 wolves, and they're not alone." "The Guardians," Lyra guessed, remembering Harrison's connection to the mysterious organization. Moira nodded reluctantly, clearly unhappy to be confirming anything Lyra said. "Human vehicles, heavily armed. They appear to be coordinating with Blackwood's pack." Dominic's expression darkened. "This confirms our fears. Blackwood has allied himself with the Guardians, offering them access to our territory in exchange for their help eliminating us." "Why would these Guardians work with another pack of werewolves?" Lyra asked. "If they're dedicated to hunting your kind, why ally with any of you?" "Politics," Dominic said grimly. Blackwood has promised to limit his pack's territory and activities, to operate under Guardian supervision. He's willing to be their attack dog, their controlled monster, as long as it gives him power over the other packs. A leashed wolf is still a wolf, Moira added with disgust. Sooner or later, the Guardians will turn on him too, but by then, the damage will be done. How long until they reach the heart of our territory? Dominic asked. Hours, perhaps, Moira replied. Our scouts are setting traps and false trails to delay them, but with their numbers. Alert the warriors, Dominic ordered. Prepare defensive positions around the sacred sites, and double the guard around the nurseries. Moira nodded, her previous resentment toward Lyra seemingly forgotten in the face of the imminent threat. What about her? She asked, inclining her head toward Lyra. The final trial is scheduled for sunset. If she hasn't completed it before they attack— I know the risks, Dominic cut her off. We proceed as planned. The anima bond must be completed if we're to have any chance against Blackwood and his allies. With a final nod, Moira disappeared back into the forest, moving with the fluid grace Lyra was beginning to recognize as characteristic of the lichens. What did she mean about risks? Lyra asked once they were alone. What happens if we don't complete the final trial before they attack? Dominic's expression was grave. The anima bond, once initiated but not completed, leaves both partners vulnerable. The first 2 trials have opened channels between us, created connections that can be exploited if left unresolved. Exploited how? Blackwood's poison was designed specifically to attack the Alpha's connection to the pack. If he learns that I've found my anima, but the bond remains incomplete— He left the implications hanging in the air between them. He could use it against us, Lyra concluded. Against you. Against both of us, Dominic corrected. The connection flows both ways now, Lyra. What affects me affects you, and vice versa. It's why the trial of will is so crucial. It seals the bond, protects it from outside influence. They reached the cabin and found Nadia waiting on the porch, Elian cradled in her arms. The young woman's expression was worried, though she tried to hide it when she saw them approach. I heard about the western boundary, she said, her voice low to avoid disturbing the baby. Is it true? Blackwood and the Guardians? I'm afraid so, Dominic confirmed. How is he? Peaceful for now, Nadia replied, looking down at Elian. But restless earlier. He seems to sense the tension in the pack. Lyra approached, gently stroking the infant's cheek with one finger. He turned toward her touch, blue eyes opening to fix on her face with that uncanny awareness. He knows you, Nadia observed, surprise evident in her tone. We've bonded, Lyra said simply. May I? She asked, holding out her arms. Nadia hesitated only briefly before transferring Elian to Lyra's care. The moment he settled against her chest, a profound sense of rightness swept through Lyra. This child belonged with her, with Dominic. Their family unit might have been formed through tragedy and extraordinary circumstances, but it was no less real for that. I'll check the perimeter defenses, Nadia said, clearly recognizing the intimate moment unfolding. The nursery is fully stocked if he needs anything. After she departed, Dominic led Lyra inside, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. The simple gesture felt both protective and reverential. In the main room of the cabin, a map of the Silvercrest territory was spread across a large table. Dominic studied it intently, his focus shifting to strategy and defense. If they approach from the west, they'll have to cross the river here. He indicated a point on the map. It's defensible. We can funnel them through the narrow pass and reduce their numerical advantage. Lyra joined him at the table, Elian still content in her arms. You're not thinking of fighting them directly, are you? You said yourself they outnumber us. Not by choice, he replied grimly. But if they breach our territory before sunset, before the trial of will is complete, we may have no alternative. The gravity of their situation settled over Lyra. Hours ago, her greatest concern had been understanding the strange connection between herself and Dominic. Now she was facing the prospect of a battle between werewolf packs, with human hunters thrown into the mix. There must be a way to delay them, she said, thinking aloud. Something to buy us time until sunset. Dominic's expression turned thoughtful. Perhaps there is. The western approach passes near the old mining tunnels. They're unstable, prone to collapse. You're thinking of causing a cave-in to block their path? He nodded. It would force them to detour miles to the north, adding precious hours to their advance. But someone would need to set charges, trigger the collapse at just the right moment. Lyra frowned. Can your scouts handle that kind of precision work? Dominic's silence was answer enough. This wasn't a task that could be delegated to the regular pack members. You're planning to go yourself, she realized, alarm rising within her. But the elders said we need to rest, to prepare for the trial of will. If you leave now, the trial cannot proceed if there's no territory left to defend, he countered. No pack to lead. This is part of my responsibility as Alpha, Lyra. Sometimes leadership means making difficult choices. She wanted to argue, to insist there must be another way, but the determined set of his jaw told her his mind was made up. This was the man she had glimpsed in the memories, the leader who put the welfare of his people above his own safety, who shouldered burdens others couldn't bear. I'm coming with you, she stated firmly. Surprise flashed across his features. Lyra, it's too dangerous. You're not fully trained? Combat experienced? She raised an eyebrow. Need I remind you I served 2 tours in Afghanistan? I'm perfectly capable of handling explosives and timing a strategic retreat. That's not what I meant, Dominic said. Your bond with me is still developing. Being apart now, even briefly, could weaken it before the final trial. Then we'll have to make sure we're back in time, Lyra replied. Besides, the trial of memory showed us our connection has existed for 5 years, even when we were physically separated. It's stronger than you think. Dominic studied her face, searching for any sign of hesitation or fear. Finding none, he nodded slowly. We'll need to arrange care for Elian, he said, his acceptance of her participation implicit in the shift to practical matters. Nadia seems trustworthy, Lyra suggested, looking down at the baby who had drifted back to sleep in her arms. She is, and the nursery here is the most secure location in our territory. Multiple protections, both physical and otherwise. The slight hesitation caught Lyra's attention. Magical, you mean? There are wards or something? A faint smile touched his lips. Our ways aren't exactly magic in the human sense, but yes, ancient protections passed down through generations. Elian will be safe here while we're gone. The plan took shape rapidly. Dominic gathered supplies while Lyra prepared Elian for their absence, settling him in the ornate crib and ensuring Nadia had everything she needed for his care. We'll be back before sunset, Lyra assured the younger woman. Whatever happens, keep him safe. With my life, Nadia promised, her expression solemn. Outside, the morning had advanced, sunlight filtering through the forest canopy in dappled patterns. Dominic led Lyra to a small outbuilding where equipment was stored. Inside, she was surprised to find not just traditional weapons, knives and bows that would be effective in wolf form, but modern gear as well, including compact explosives. The benefits of serving in special operations, Dominic explained, seeing her raised eyebrow. We've adapted military tactics and equipment to suit our needs. They packed efficiently, taking only what was necessary for their mission. As they prepared to leave, Dominic paused, his expression growing serious. There's something you should know before we go, he said. Something I've been reluctant to explain until you had more context. Lyra tensed, remembering his earlier words. No more secrets between us. The trial of will, Dominic continued. It typically manifests as a choice, a decision the anima must make that proves their commitment to the bond, to the pack. What kind of choice? His amber eyes held hers steadily. Often it requires the anima to sever ties with their human past, to commit fully to the pack, even if it means leaving behind the life they once knew. The implications sank in slowly. You mean, I might have to choose between my research, my career, everything I've built, and you? The pack? The bond doesn't necessarily require you to abandon your work, Dominic clarified, but it does demand primacy. The pack must come first in your considerations, your loyalties. Lyra absorbed this, trying to imagine what such a choice might look like in her specific circumstances. And if I can't make that choice, if I fail the trial, then the bond remains incomplete, he said quietly, vulnerable, and given the threats we're facing. He didn't need to finish the thought. An incomplete bond would be a weakness their enemies could exploit, a chink in their armor at the worst possible moment. I thought you should know before we proceed, Dominic finished, so you can begin to prepare yourself for what might be asked of you. Lyra nodded, grateful for his honesty, despite the apprehension it provoked. No more secrets, she agreed. Together they left the cabin, moving silently through the forest toward the western boundary of Silvercrest territory. The mission ahead was fraught with danger, but it would buy them precious time they needed if they were to have any chance of completing the trial of will before Blackwood's forces arrived. As they traveled deeper into the wilderness, Lyra felt the weight of the coming decision pressing upon her. By sunset, she would have to make a choice that would irrevocably change the course of her life. But as she glanced at Dominic moving confidently beside her, as she thought of Elian sleeping peacefully in his protected nursery, she realized her heart had already begun to make that choice, had perhaps begun making it 5 years ago in the dust and chaos of Afghanistan, when amber eyes had found hers and a connection beyond words had sparked into existence. Whatever sacrifice the trial of will demanded, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her through war, through loss, through isolation. Not just for Dominic or for Elian, but for the woman she was becoming, the anima she was meant to be. The western boundary of Silvercrest territory wound through rugged terrain, ancient pine forests giving way to rocky outcrops and deep ravines carved by centuries of seasonal runoff. Dominic moved with silent efficiency, his enhanced senses alert to any sign of intrusion. Lyra followed close behind, her military training evident in her careful footwork and situational awareness. They reached the abandoned mining complex shortly before noon. Weather-worn timber frames marked tunnel entrances, the once busy site now reclaimed by nature. Dominic led them to a crumbling stone building that might have once been an administrative office. The main access road passes directly beneath this ridgeline, he explained, spreading a hand-drawn map across a dust-covered desk. If we collapse the primary tunnel here, it will trigger a chain reaction. The entire hillside will come down, blocking the approach for at least 12 hours. Lyra studied the diagram, her mind calculating angles and pressure points. We'll need to set charges at these structural supports, she indicated several key locations. Synchronized detonation to ensure maximum effect. Dominic looked at her with newfound respect. Your military experience is proving invaluable. Combat engineering wasn't my specialty, but we all received basic training. She traced the escape route marked on the map. This old ventilation shaft will give us enough time to clear the blast radius? Yes. It emerges half a mile east, well away from the collapse zone. They set to work immediately, placing explosive charges at strategic points throughout the main tunnel. The work was methodical, requiring careful attention to detail. As they moved deeper into the mountain, the air grew cool and damp, heavy with the scent of minerals and earth. "Tell me more about Blackwood," Lyra said, as they positioned a charge near a critical support beam. "What drives him to ally with humans who would ultimately destroy his own kind?" Dominic's expression darkened. Xavier Blackwood believes in Lycan supremacy. He sees humans as lesser beings, tools to be used and discarded. The alliance with the Guardians is purely tactical, a means to eliminate his immediate rivals. And afterward? He believes he can outsmart them, turn on them once we're eliminated. What he fails to understand is that the Guardians have centuries of experience hunting our kind. They're using him just as surely as he thinks he's using them. Lyra secured the final wire connection. It sounds like a dangerously symbiotic relationship. Made more dangerous by Harrison's involvement, Dominic added grimly. His obsession with you gives him personal motivation beyond the Guardian's typical mission. The mention of Harrison sent a chill through Lyra. You think he's still fixated on me? After all this time? The trial of memory showed us the truth of his character. He never saw you as a partner, but as a possession. When you left, when you proved yourself beyond his control." Dominic let the implication hang in the air. "He couldn't accept it," Lyra finished. "And now, finding me allied with the very creatures he's dedicated his life to hunting, it would be a double betrayal in his eyes." They worked in silence for several minutes, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The final charge was placed with careful precision beneath a massive wooden support beam that had begun to rot with age and moisture. "That's the last one," Lyra announced, checking the connection. "The detonator is set. We should have 30 minutes once activated, more than enough time to reach the ventilation shaft." Dominic nodded, gathering their remaining equipment. "Let's move to the observation point. We need visual confirmation before triggering the collapse." They retraced their steps through the winding tunnels, emerging once more into sunlight. The observation point was a natural outcrop that provided a clear view of the valley approach. Dominic settled into position, extracting a pair of military-grade binoculars from his pack. "Now we wait," he said, scanning the distant landscape. Lyra sat beside him, the detonator secured in her pack. The sun had passed its zenith, beginning its gradual descent toward the western mountains. They had perhaps 5 hours until sunset, until the trial of will. "How will we know when it's time?" she asked after a comfortable silence. "For the trial, I mean." "The elders will summon us through the pack bond. You'll feel it too, now that the first 2 trials have awakened your connection." Lyra considered this, still adjusting to the idea that she was developing senses and abilities beyond normal human capacity. "And what exactly happens during the trial? You mentioned a choice, but what form will it take?" Dominic lowered the binoculars, his amber eyes meeting hers. "The trial of will manifests differently for each pair. For some, it's a physical challenge. For others, a spiritual journey. But always, at its core, it requires the anima to make a conscious, deliberate choice to embrace the bond in its entirety, with all its responsibilities and consequences." "You're worried," Lyra observed, reading the subtle tension in his expression. "The trial can be intense. And with Blackwood's forces approaching, with the Guardians involved, the stakes are higher than they've ever been." "You're afraid I'll fail," she said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, simply an acknowledgement of the pressure they both felt. Dominic's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with natural ease. "I'm afraid of asking too much of you," he corrected. "You didn't choose this, Lyra. The bond formed between us without your knowledge or consent. Now you're being asked to sacrifice for a pack you barely know, to fight enemies you didn't make." The honesty in his words touched her deeply. Unlike Harrison, who had expected her to conform to his needs without question, Dominic recognized the weight of what was being asked of her. "I may not have chosen how this began," Lyra said carefully, "but I can choose how it continues." She tightened her grip on his hand. "And I choose to be here, with you, with Elian, with the pack." Something shifted in Dominic's expression. A softening, a vulnerable hope quickly contained behind the necessary armor of leadership. Before he could respond, his body tensed, head turning sharply toward the valley below. "Movement," he said, raising the binoculars again. "Southeast approach. 3 vehicles, military grade." Lyra accepted the binoculars, focusing on the distant dust cloud. 3 black SUVs were indeed approaching, following the winding dirt road that led toward the mining complex. "Guardians," she confirmed. "Same vehicles that pursued us in the desert. And they're not alone." Dominic indicated a parallel movement through the forest flanking the road. To normal human eyes, it would have been invisible, but with her enhanced senses, Lyra could just make out the coordinated shadows moving swiftly between trees. "Blackwood's wolves," she whispered. "How many?" "At least a dozen that I can see, more likely hidden from view." His expression hardened. "They've arrived sooner than expected. We need to move now." Lyra nodded, retrieving the detonator from her pack. "Once we trigger the collapse, they'll know we're here. We'll have to move fast. The ventilation shaft is our best escape route. It emerges well behind our current position, giving us a clear path back to Silvercrest's core territory." They moved to the edge of the outcrop, positioning themselves for a rapid descent once the charges were triggered. Lyra activated the detonator, the small LED display beginning its 30-minute countdown. "It's done," she said. 29 minutes until detonation. Together they began their careful retreat, moving from cover to cover with practiced coordination. The ventilation shaft entrance was hidden behind a stand of scrub pine, its rusted metal grate long since collapsed. "I'll go first," Dominic said, dropping into a crouch to examine the dark opening. "The shaft narrows in places. My night vision will help navigate the worst sections." He slipped into the darkness with fluid grace, reaching back to help Lyra follow. The shaft was indeed narrow, forcing them to move in single file through the cool, damp tunnel. Dominic led the way with confidence, his enhanced senses guiding them through turns and junctions that would have been disorienting to human perception. They had covered perhaps half the distance to the exit when a deep, reverberating boom shook the mountain around them. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling of the shaft. "The charges!" Lyra gasped, checking her watch. "They've detonated early." Dominic's expression was grim in the dim light filtering from a crack overhead. "Sabotage. Someone tampered with our work after we left." "Blackwood scouts?" "Possibly. Or the Guardians have technology we didn't account for. Either way, we need to move faster." They increased their pace, ignoring the scrapes and bruises acquired in the narrow confines of the shaft. The sound of the collapse continued to echo through the mountain, accompanied by smaller secondary cave-ins, as unstable sections of the old mine gave way. They were nearing the exit when Dominic suddenly froze, arm extended to halt Lyra's progress. "Listen," he whispered. At first, Lyra heard nothing beyond the settling of disturbed earth. Then faintly came the sound that had alerted Dominic, voices, human voices, directly above the exit point of the ventilation shaft. "Guardians," Dominic confirmed quietly. "They must have split their forces, sending a team to secure potential escape routes." "How many?" 3, maybe 4, all armed." He glanced back at her. "We can't go back. The main tunnels are collapsed now." Lyra's mind raced, evaluating their limited options. "Can you take them? In wolf form?" Dominic's expression was troubled. "Yes, but transformation now, so close to the trial of will. It would drain energy I'll need later." "Then we go together," Lyra said firmly. "I'm not exactly defenseless." She withdrew the compact 9mm from her jacket, checking the magazine. Dominic studied her face, seeing the determination there. After a moment, he nodded. "Together, then. On my signal." They crept forward to where the shaft widened near its exit. Dappled sunlight filtered through gaps in the rusted grate that partially covered the opening. Through these gaps, they could see booted feet moving back and forth, guardians patrolling the area. Dominic signaled silently with his hands, a tactical gesture Lyra recognized from her military days. 3, 2, 1. With explosive force, he slammed into the rusted grate, sending it flying outward. The Guardians reacted instantly, weapons swinging toward the unexpected threat, but Dominic was already among them, moving with supernatural speed. Lyra emerged a heartbeat later, weapon raised. 4 Guardians, all in tactical gear, all momentarily disoriented by Dominic's blurring attack. She fired twice, disabling rather than killing, shots placed with precision to incapacitate. 2 Guardians fell, clutching wounded limbs. Dominic had already neutralized a third, the man's unconscious form crumpled against a tree trunk. The 4th Guardian, a tall woman with close-cropped hair, raised her weapon toward Lyra. "Don't move," she commanded, her aim unwavering. "Harrison wants you alive, but he didn't specify undamaged." The name struck Lyra like a physical blow. "Harrison is here? Personally?" A cold smile curved the Guardian's lips. "He wouldn't miss this for the world. Your betrayal hit him hard, Dr. Morgan, consorting with animals, protecting the very creatures we've sworn to eliminate." Dominic tensed, preparing to lunge toward the armed woman, but her weapon shifted smoothly to cover him. "Don't even think it, Alpha. This rifle is loaded with silver nitrate rounds. One hit, and you'll be paralyzed within seconds." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, neither side willing to risk the first move. Then a new voice broke the tension. Familiar, cultured and chilling in its casual cruelty. "Well, isn't this a touching scene? The beast and his human pet, working together so effectively." Harrison Pierce stepped into the clearing, immaculate as always in expensive outdoor wear that looked as if it had never seen actual use. His handsome features were arranged in an expression of theatrical disappointment. "Hello, Lyra," he said, as if greeting her at a social function. "You're looking well. Desert life clearly agrees with you." Lyra kept her weapon trained on the female guardian, acutely aware that Harrison himself likely carried concealed firearms. "You're a long way from your corner office, Harrison. Slumming it with the foot soldiers?" "Some matters require personal attention," he replied smoothly, "particularly when they involve valuable assets." "Assets," Lyra repeated, disgust evident in her tone. "Is that what I was to you? An asset?" "Don't be dramatic. You were an opportunity, a connection to your grandfather's research, to his understanding of these creatures and their territories." He gestured dismissively toward Dominic. "A means to an end that unfortunately proved defective in the most fundamental way." The casual cruelty of his words no longer had power to wound her. Lyra felt only a distant pity for the man she had once thought she loved. "And now? What am I now, Harrison?" "A loose end," he said simply. "One I intend to tie up personally." Dominic's voice was dangerously calm when he spoke. "You won't touch her." Harrison's smile never reached his eyes. Bold words from someone moments away from capture. "Blackwood's forces have surrounded this area. My team has the tactical advantage. And you," he looked Dominic up and down with undisguised contempt, "are clearly diminished from your encounter with Blackwood's poison." As if summoned by his name, a massive wolf emerged from the tree line, larger than Dominic's wolf form had been, with fur as black as midnight and eyes that gleamed with malevolent intelligence. Behind him came others, at least 8 wolves of varying sizes, all watching with predatory focus. "Alpha Blackwood," Harrison acknowledged with a slight nod. "Right on schedule." The black wolf growled, a sound that sent primitive fear coursing through Lyra's system despite her enhanced resilience. Then, in a transformation far more fluid and controlled than Dominic's had been, the wolf shifted into human form. Xavier Blackwood stood naked and unashamed, his body corded with lean muscle, his face strikingly handsome in a cruel, angular way. His eyes retained the same malevolent gleam they had possessed in wolf form. "Ravenwood," he said, his voice a cultured baritone that belied his savage nature. "How disappointing to find you still alive, and with your human whore no less." Dominic's body tensed, ready to attack despite the overwhelming odds. Lyra placed a restraining hand on his arm, her mind racing for a solution that wouldn't end in their immediate deaths. "The trial of will," she whispered, so quietly only Dominic's enhanced hearing could catch it. "When is sunset?" His eyes flickered momentarily to the western horizon, visible through a gap in the trees. 2 hours, perhaps less. Not enough time to escape and reach the sacred pool where the elders waited, not with Blackwood's forces and the guardians surrounding them. Which meant, "We need to complete the trial here," Lyra murmured. "Now." Dominic's eyes widened slightly as he grasped her meaning. "Without the elders? Without the sacred waters? It's never been done." "We don't have a choice." Lyra's grip tightened on his arm. "The bond exists regardless of ceremony. You said it yourself. The trial is about choice, about commitment." Understanding dawned in his amber eyes, followed by concern. "The consequences will be no worse than what we're facing now," she finished firmly. Their silent exchange lasted mere seconds, unnoticed by their captors who were engaged in their own tense negotiation. "The agreement was clear," Harrison was saying to Blackwood. "The female is mine. The alpha and any pack members are yours to deal with as you see fit." Blackwood's smile revealed teeth too sharp to be fully human, even in his current form. "Plans change, Guardian. The female has begun the anima bonding process. She's no longer merely human. Her fate is tied to his." Harrison's carefully composed expression slipped, revealing genuine shock. "Anima? That's impossible." The records indicate no alpha has found a true anima in generations. And yet, here she stands, Blackwood replied, his gaze shifting to Lyra with new interest. I can smell the change in her. The first 2 trials have already altered her essence. The female guardian shifted nervously, her weapon still trained on Dominic. Sir, what does this mean for the operation? Harrison's face hardened as he reassessed the situation. It changes nothing. If she's bound to the creature, they'll die together. Secure them both. As the remaining guardians moved to comply, Lyra made her decision. With deliberate calm, she lowered her weapon, allowing it to fall to the forest floor. The unexpected action froze everyone momentarily. Dominic Ravenwood, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the clearing. I choose you. I choose the bond. I choose the pack. Here and now, before these witnesses, I commit myself fully to the path of the anima. The ritual words, spoken without prompting or instruction, emerged from some deep wellspring of knowledge awakened by the previous trials. As she spoke, Lyra felt a surge of energy within her, a resonance that seemed to vibrate between herself and Dominic with increasing intensity. Lyra Morgan, Dominic responded, his voice deepening with power. I accept your choice. I acknowledge your commitment. I welcome you as my anima, my balance, my completion. What is this? Harrison demanded, a note of alarm entering his voice. Stop them! But Blackwood raised a hand, halting his pack's advance. His expression showed reluctant fascination. The final trial, he murmured. They're attempting to complete the bond without the Elder's guidance. The energy between Lyra and Dominic intensified, visible now as a faint golden glow that surrounded them both. The crescent scars on their palms, legacy of the trial of blood, began to shine with silver light. By blood we are connected, Lyra continued, extending her marked palm toward Dominic. By memory we are united, he responded, pressing his palm against hers. By will we are completed. They spoke together, fingers intertwining. The golden glow exploded outward in a shockwave of pure energy. Harrison and the Guardians were thrown backward, weapons flying from their hands. Blackwood and his wolves braced against the surge, their eyes reflecting supernatural light. In the epicenter of the energy wave, Lyra felt herself transformed. Not physically, she remained human in form, but fundamentally at the level of essence. The latent abilities awakened by the previous trials crystallized into permanent capacity. Her senses sharpened beyond anything she had experienced before. Her awareness expanded to encompass the entire clearing, the forest beyond, the territory she now recognized as home. Most profound was the bond with Dominic. No longer a tentative connection, it had become an unbreakable tether between their souls. She could feel his strength flowing into her, her resilience reinforcing his. Two beings, distinct yet fundamentally interconnected, balancing and completing each other. As the golden light receded, Lyra became aware of the stunned silence that had fallen over the clearing. The Guardians were struggling to regain their feet. Blackwood and his pack remained motionless, watchful. Harrison was the first to recover, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What have you done to yourself?" he demanded, staring at Lyra as if she had become unrecognizable. Before she could answer, a new sound filled the clearing, a howl, distant but approaching rapidly. Then another joined it, and another, until the air vibrated with the chorus of an entire pack in full voice. "Silvercrest," Dominic said, satisfaction evident in his tone. "They've felt the completion of the bond. They come to defend their alpha and anima." Blackwood snarled, his handsome features twisting into something feral. "This changes nothing, Ravenwood. Your pack is still outnumbered. The Guardians still possess weapons that can destroy you all." "Perhaps," Dominic acknowledged. "But are you willing to risk everything on that assumption, now that the anima bond is complete?" Uncertainty flickered in Blackwood's eyes. The legends of the alpha-anima bond were ancient and powerful. The combined strength of a properly bonded pair was said to be formidable, though none living had witnessed such power in generations. "Sir," the female guardian addressed Harrison, Our backup team reports multiple contacts approaching from the east, fast-moving, at least 20 individuals. Harrison's calculating mind rapidly reassessed the tactical situation. Blackwood, your pack needs to intercept them. Buy us time to regroup. But the rival Alpha was already backing away, his wolves mirroring his retreat. This wasn't part of our arrangement, Guardian. You promised us an easy target, a weakened Alpha, a vulnerable pack. This, he gestured toward Lyra and Dominic, still surrounded by fading golden light, is something else entirely. You're breaking our agreement? Harrison's voice was dangerous in its quietness. Blackwood smiled, a predator's display of teeth. Consider it renegotiated. My pack will withdraw for now. Your guardians can face Silvercrest's wrath alone. With that, he shifted back to wolf form, the transformation even more fluid than before. His pack followed suit, massive bodies flowing into shadow-black wolves that melted into the forest with supernatural speed. "Coward!" Harrison shouted after the retreating wolves, but his fury fell on empty air. He turned back to Lyra and Dominic, his expression coldly murderous. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Dominic stepped forward, placing himself between Harrison and Lyra. His posture radiated a new confidence, a power that hadn't been present before the completion of the bond. "It is over, Harrison," he said calmly. "You've lost your werewolf allies. Your team is outnumbered, and you're facing an Alpha and Anima whose bond was forged in the very moment of greatest need, the strongest possible connection our kind can achieve." As if to emphasize his words, the first of Silvercrest's wolves burst into the clearing, massive silver-gray forms with teeth bared and hackles raised. They formed a protective circle around Dominic and Lyra, growls rumbling from deep chests. Harrison assessed the situation with the cold calculation of a man accustomed to weighing odds and cutting losses. "Tactical retreat," he ordered his remaining guardians. "Fall back to secondary position." The woman with the close-cropped hair looked as if she might protest, but a sharp glance from Harrison silenced her. With military efficiency, the Guardians gathered their wounded and began to withdraw, weapons still trained on the advancing wolves. "This is merely a postponement, Lyra," Harrison called back as he reached the tree line. "Sooner or later, you'll have to choose a side in this war, and despite your unfortunate attachments, you're still human at your core, remember that." With those parting words, he disappeared into the forest, the Guardians melting away like morning mist. As the immediate threat receded, the Silvercrest wolves began to shift, transforming back to human form. Moira was among the first, quickly donning clothes provided by pack members who had remained human during the approach. "Alpha," she acknowledged, dropping to one knee before Dominic. Then, to Lyra's surprise, she repeated the gesture toward her. "Anima." We felt the bond complete. The entire pack experienced it. "We had no choice," Dominic explained. "Blackwood and the Guardians had us surrounded. The trial of will had to be completed without the traditional ceremonies." Moira's expression registered shock, followed by growing respect as she looked at Lyra. "To complete the bond under such circumstances, it hasn't been done in our recorded history." Other pack members were gathering now, some still catching their breath from the rapid journey through the forest. All regarded Lyra with a new deference, the previous suspicion replaced by something approaching awe. "The elders?" Dominic asked. "Await your return at the sacred pool," Moira replied. They felt the completion of the bond as we all did, but they remained concerned about the ritual aspects that were bypassed. Dominic nodded, his hand finding Lyra's. "We'll address their concerns, but first, we need to secure our territory. Blackwood has withdrawn for now, but he won't go far, and the Guardians remain a threat." Moira rose to her feet, assuming the role of second-in-command with natural ease. "I'll organize perimeter patrols, double shifts until we're certain they've fully retreated." As she began issuing orders to the assembled pack members, Dominic turned to Lyra, his amber eyes searching her face. "Are you all right? The completion of the bond, especially under such circumstances, can be overwhelming." Lyra took inventory of her physical and mental state. The rush of power she had experienced during the trial of will had settled into something more sustainable, a constant warm current flowing beneath her normal awareness. Her senses remained heightened, but no longer overwhelmingly so, and the connection to Dominic had solidified into something that felt as natural as breathing. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Better than fine, actually. I feel complete." Relief softened his features. The traditional ceremony has value, but in the end, it's the choice that matters. Your willingness to commit fully, even in the face of danger, that's the true essence of the trial of will. They began the journey back to Silvercrest's central territory, surrounded by a protective guard of pack members. The forest seemed different to Lyra now, more vibrant, more alive, resonating with energies she could perceive but not fully explain. Her scientist's mind noted these changes with fascination rather than fear. "What happens now?" she asked as they walked. "With the bond complete, what changes?" "Everything and nothing," Dominic replied thoughtfully. "You remain who you are, your knowledge, your skills, your essential nature. But now you're also connected to the pack, to me, to our territory in ways that transcend normal human experience. And my research, my work, can continue if that's what you want. The bond doesn't require you to abandon your passion or your expertise. In fact, your understanding of desert plants could be invaluable to the pack. There are ancient healing traditions among our people that incorporate botanical knowledge." The thought brought unexpected comfort. Lyra had feared that embracing her role as anima would mean sacrificing the career she had built. Instead, it seemed her scientific background might find new, expanded purpose within the pack structure. As they approached the heart of Silvercrest territory, Lyra's thoughts turned to Elian. "The baby? Is he safe?" "Yes," Dominic assured her, the bond between them allowing him to sense her concern. "Nadia would have taken him to the central nursery at the first sign of danger. It's the most protected location in our territory." The sacred pool came into view, its waters reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. The 7 elders stood in their ceremonial places, faces solemn as Lyra and Dominic approached. "Alpha Dominic Ravenwood, Lyra Morgan," Thaddeus intoned formally. "You have completed the trial of will without the sacred waters, without the traditional rites. This has not been done in living memory." "We had no choice, Elder," Dominic explained respectfully. "Blackwood's forces, allied with the Guardians, surrounded us. The bond had to be completed or risk being severed permanently." Thaddeus studied them both, his ancient eyes seeing beyond physical appearances to the energy that now flowed between them. "The bond is indeed complete," he acknowledged, "and unusually strong, perhaps because of the circumstances of its formation." Tamra stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "The old texts speak of this, bonds formed in moments of greatest need, transcending traditional ceremonies. They are rare, but powerful." "What does this mean for Lyra?" Dominic asked. "For her role within the pack?" "It means she is truly your anima," Thaddeus replied simply. "Regardless of how the bond was completed, the result is the same. She stands as your equal, your balance, your strength when you falter." The elder turned his attention directly to Lyra. "The path ahead will not be easy, Lyra Morgan. Blackwood will return. The Guardians will not abandon their hunt. And there are aspects of the anima role that you have yet to discover, powers and responsibilities that will emerge with time." "I'm ready," Lyra said with quiet certainty. "Whatever comes next, I made my choice freely and fully." A rare smile crossed Thaddeus's weathered face. "Then let it be known throughout Silvercrest territory and beyond. The Alpha has found his anima. The bond is complete. The pack is whole once more." As the elders dispersed, Dominic led Lyra toward the center of the territory, where the main pack compound nestled among ancient trees. The setting sun cast long shadows across their path, but Lyra's enhanced vision adjusted easily to the fading light. "There's someone waiting to see you," Dominic said as they approached his cabin. On the porch stood Nadia, Elian cradled securely in her arms. The infant was awake, tiny hands reaching toward the sky as if trying to catch the last rays of sunlight. When they drew closer, Elian turned his head, his impossible blue eyes finding Lyra immediately. A sound of delight escaped him, not quite a laugh, but filled with recognition and joy. "He feels the bond too," Nadia explained, transferring the baby to Lyra's waiting arms. "All of Silvercrest does, but he most of all. His future is tied to yours now." Lyra cradled Elian against her chest, marveling at how natural it felt to hold him, to protect him. 3 days ago, she had been a solitary researcher, defined by what she lacked: fertility, partnership, purpose beyond her scientific work. Now she stood transformed, anima to an alpha, protector of a pack, guardian to a child who might one day lead them all. Dominic's arm encircled her waist, drawing her and Elian into a gentle embrace. Through their bond, she felt his contentment, his relief, his hope for their shared future. "Welcome home," he murmured against her hair. And it was home, Lyra realized. Not just the territory, or the cabin, or even the pack itself, but this connection, this belonging, this purpose that had found her when she least expected it. The desert had not been a place of emptiness after all, but the beginning of a journey, one that had led her not to isolation, but to the very family she had believed forever beyond her reach. As darkness settled over Silvercrest territory, Lyra Morgan stood between worlds, human scientist and lichen anima, independent woman and pack leader, barren by medical definition, yet mother in every way that mattered to the child in her arms. The challenges ahead remained formidable. Blackwood would return. Harrison and his guardians would continue their hunt. The balance between human and lichen worlds would require careful navigation. But for now, in this moment, surrounded by the silver-tinged darkness of a forest that had become her home, Lyra felt only certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Alpha and Anima, bound by choice and destiny, rejected no more.